Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream. As always, hope you're all doing well. Galamoth, Christopher Jenkins, Alicia, Lavish Peasant, Mr. Gigalag, Calix Datura, Wes, Bubba, nice to see all of you again. So, in case like Bloody Miura is still hanging around in the chat, or if he watches this later, the ban is going to be temporary. It's only going to be like a week-long ban because I really don't care about your theories. It was more or less the way that you're presenting them to the Discord, and then when I gave you a warning, the fact that you insinuated that other people just weren't understanding is not a cool move, and you should be a little bit more reflective about the feedback that you're given. But I mean, there's really no hard feelings. You just need to actually follow the rules. So yeah, there's a little bit of Discord drama, but it's not a big deal. So sorry to start off the stream on that type of news, but I mean, it is what it is. So Pigsy, Jay Dixon, Ponyboy, Galaxy Dragon, and Elden Enthusiast, welcome back to the stream. Nice to see you guys. Wi-Fi on planes is pretty good. Are you on a plane right now, or is that just kind of a throwaway comment? And if so, where are you headed, if you don't mind me asking? Anticipated, nice to see you again. All right. So yesterday on stream, we actually watched a bunch of videos for once. It was a little bit of a mistake, but with ending with the Gloam Queen, because that took me like an hour over what I intended. But anyway, the first one we watched was The Paradox of Godric the Grafted, Elden Ring Lore by Lorebrain. Then we transitioned into Sir Gideon Ofnir, War Criminal by Honored Madman. Then The Language of Color in Games by Second Wind in their series of the semi-ramblomatic video essays. Then we watched Square Table Gaming's Elden Ring Lore, the Olivinus Conspectus, which is pretty good, because I really have a lot of difficulties remembering the differences between the Conspecti. And then we finished off with the Gloam Devastation, Elden Ring Theory by Zach Magnus. So for anybody who might not know about this other like little bit of drama, Quelaag got her account hacked earlier in the week, and her channel has been kind of saved. So that's very good news in the midst of like what could have been even worse news. So I'm glad that everything is resolved now. So I noticed when this video came out like a couple weeks ago, but then I was like, I don't want to necessarily watch it while it's like fresh, hot off the presses. Let the dust settle a little bit, let them garner as many views as they can. And then we got info about that new DLC trailer, and then all hell broke loose, so I just didn't get around to checking out this video. This is the only video I have queued up for now, just because I've been going over so much, and Quelaag always has like a lot of really interesting things to say, which is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because quite often I feel like I don't have a lot to add to what she's saying, and then other times I feel like we could probably bounce off for a very long time, so I might watch something else after this, but if so, I'm not entirely sure what to do yet. But before that, let me go ahead and get rid of some of these videos that we've already watched on the playlist, because otherwise I will forget about them, and that's no bueno. Because I haven't been keeping up with that. Okay, so that'll make it easier to figure out if we want to watch another video after this one. So, you're going to take off your earrings just in case? Hey Stella, nice to see you. And Levo, nice to have you again. Yeah. Oh, you've got arthritis, Alicia? That sucks. Good luck with Radagon's Red Wolf. Jesse, nice to see you again. Without horns. Can't wait for every new crafting material to be a butterfly in the DLC. Yushu, nice to see you. Scallies, welcome back in. And Oddspace. Any new news? Not quite yet. Hey Necropolis, welcome back in. Got a lot of people early tonight. Cool. So yeah, Quelaag's a really good content creator, despite having like a pretty small channel. She's got a really active like Twitch following and stuff like that. She streams quite frequently on the weekdays, which is not like the best for my time schedule, because it tends to be in like the afternoon or something like that. So if you guys are unfamiliar with her channel, she's kind of where I first learned about Miro boards from, which is super cool, and a lot of her videos are just kind of unironic Pepe Sylvia, what are they called? Like collage boards or whatever they're called. But with a bit more grounded takes at times. So yeah, this video title has definitely caught my attention with the butterflies keep me up at night, because I don't really have too strong opinions on the whole butterfly situation. I figure it could be a number of factors. And I think I've said for a long time about the butterflies that I wouldn't be surprised if we had a Norse situation on our hands as well. So with the addition of Mesmer with the DLC and whatnot, I wouldn't be surprised if the Smoldering one would correspond to him, although it looks like she might correspond potentially to Melina in this video. So this was made 2 weeks ago. I don't remember what date the new trailer came out, but it looks like she's sticking with her guns with saying maybe Melina is the Smoldering Butterfly, although she might go into some peripheral type theories there. Scally's got some pizza. Did you make enough to share with the chat? All right, Stella. Went to work early, and that's why you're here on time. Sweet. Christopher can answer if I'd like. No, not yet. I'll let Quelaag do the talking. I'm just kind of like spitballing based off the little bit I can see, but I appreciate you asking. SpaghettiOs. Hopefully they're warm. I know some people like to eat SpaghettiOs cold. I can't do it personally. Gidelag learned about Miro when them and their friends were into world building for your setting, but it was very cool to see Miro representation. Okay. What kind of psycho would do that? Impatient ones. All right. So let's go ahead and check out The Butterflies Keep Me Up at Night by Quelaag.
All right. This one is for the old heads who have been following my channel for a long time and are used to me just like turning on the camera and screaming without any editing and with my dog barking in the background. This video is for you because that's going to be...
Oh God, I remember that one video with Quelaag having the coop counter in the background. Like it got up to like, what was it, like 26 snores or something? No, I think it was even higher than that. It might have been like in the 50s. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but yeah, I definitely have felt that difficulty with trying to make presentations before. Hey Mile, nice to see you again. And Clown, welcome back in.
Be the format this time. I'm sorry that I haven't been able to like put in time and effort into like properly editing my videos, but thank you all so much for supporting me and watching a lot of my newer content. I've been in the process of moving and we finally moved, so I'll finally be able to like dedicate more time and energy into making videos for you guys, which is going to be awesome because the DLC is right around the corner. I feel like I moved at the most opportune time. I was worried that it was going to land during June, but thankfully we're here, we're out here, and we're going to be doing our best. So I'm going to be talking about the butterfly crafting items and which child they represent, but it actually, this video got way more complex and a lot more hefty than I was thinking it was going to be. I thought it was just going to be like...
Preaching to the choir here, I feel that.
Like, this butterfly is Malenia, this butterfly is Miquella, and this butterfly may or may not be Mesmer or Melina. Let's get into it. It actually got way more complicated, and a lot of that is because there's a lot of discourse around fragmented identity and whether or not one soul can fragment into multiple other characters. There's also a really great lore theory right now floating around, and I want to give a huge shout out to Tim Diggity. So go check out Tim's video on Is Miquella Melina, because I think it is really compelling, specifically in regard to the Spirit Calling Bell and how Melina ended up with Torrent's Ring. I'm going to explore another avenue that could be interpreted, but I am open to that being a thing. For those of you that are new to the Soulsborne series,
so even though I admit that I kind of hate Is Miquella Melina theory, I really feel like I'm kind of living in a glass house throwing stones because I feel like that would just be too much going on for Melina. But I'm also somehow comfortable with Melina potentially being the Gloamite Queen. But I think Gloamite Queen and or America. But I think part of the reason why the Miquella stuff doesn't quite sit as right for me is because I already feel like he has too much going on and there's less ambiguity about his existence in the timeline than Melina's or America's or even the Gloamite Queen's. So, just trying to recognize my own potential hypocrisy there. Anticipated really hopes this whole blank is blank stuff doesn't turn out to be true. It was enough with America for you. So yeah, I definitely feel that as well. And I'm not exactly happy that I've contributed to it, but I really feel like Elden Ring kind of opened Pandora's box as soon as it was confirmed that Radagon is America or vice versa, just because we didn't have that in the previous Souls games, and I would always kind of shut those styles of theories down. But not only is it just Radagon and America to consider, we have Hayata, Shibriri, kind of Gowrie to a lesser extent, and of course their counterparts with what's her face, Arena, Yura, and like the rot pests specifically. And there's probably some other weird grafting stuff to consider, and of course Miquella and Saint Trina, although that one was kind of more what's the word, I don't want to say on the nose, not accepted or acceptable. That one is kind of maybe more par for the course, because like in fantasy settings, who you are in dreams isn't necessarily completely congruent with who you are as an individual in the real/waking world. So that one wasn't too out there for me to believe, especially because like so much of the imagery is more or less shoplifted from the original Miquella designs and whatnot. Elden says their view on that is because they have similarities. Damn it, they have similarities because they're related. And I think that's actually a very fair and reasoned take that everyone's going to tear you apart for. Skellies said, if there was a snake with butterfly wings, then you'd say it's Mesmer's, but right now he doesn't even have one. Okay. All right. And Mao said, you always heard of Quelaag, but you never agreed with her theories. So that's kind of like one of the fun parts for me, like doing this stuff, because even if I do like, what's the word? Fervently disagree with people, I think quite often they can come up with some perspectives that I may not have considered that might make me rethink things. Even if I disagree with their theory, I think it's just more food for thought, and that overall can be a good thing, provided such theories are grounded with the text to a degree, or at least if they aren't like circular theories and just kind of don't build on pretenses that I disagree with. But anyway, all right, let's go back to the video.
Series, it's actually not super uncommon for one character to be fragmented into multiple characters. Specifically in Dark Souls 1, we have Manus, who in Dark Souls 2, his soul gets fragmented into multiple souls, and all of them are women. All of them are women that end up becoming rulers or leaders, and it's really awesome to see, like, I don't know, I didn't...
Yeah, I think that's kind of fair, but I do think Elden Ring goes the extra mile, because in DS2, that's more of a reincarnation type thing, as opposed to, no, these characters are still kind of active at the same time on the timeline, which is just way harder to piece together with all of these questions of identity that are unanswered.
Used to like this idea of kind of like this cycle of reused characters. I used to hate that because I thought maybe it was lazy writing, but now that I understand that it's supposed to depict a cycle of like repeat errors or a cycle of suffering, I do understand that, and I appreciate it a lot more now, especially that Miyazaki has the support and the, finances and like the team to amplify his vision. I think also getting George R.R. Martin on the writing has been like incredibly helpful. I just love the way that everything is manifested in Elden Ring. It's so wonderful. And I'm going to get into all of that while we dive into this. But before I get into each individual child and some of the identity stuff that's going on in this game, and like who's the Gloam Queen, who is Melina, who is Miquella, who is Saint Trina, I do need to break down some kind of like baseline lore that we've covered in other videos. For those of you that have seen my Elden John video, and for those of you that have seen any of my older videos, this is going to be like old news to you. But for those of you that are new here and like have no clue who Elden John is, this is for you. I'm going to go over this very quickly.
All right, chat. I have a public confession. I hate the moniker Elden John. No real reason. I just hate it. So, yeah, I try not to say it just because I hate it, but sometimes I'll call him Elden John just because I don't feel like explaining it. So I've contributed to the problem myself, but I hate it. Just wanted to share that. So anyway, Elodelia had an interesting comment in that she says, there's some people who are treating the DLC release like the lore lottery, where the aim is to buy tickets by wildly looking for things to speculate about, hoping for the I was right jackpot. I mean, there's certainly going to be a lot more fervor as the hype increases before the release of the DLC, and I don't really blame YouTubers because, I mean, let's be real here. If you're doing it for like the monetization, there's a lot of incentive to kind of make these crackpot theories, which I'm not going to begrudge people because at the end of the game, it's just all part of the game. End of the day, it's all part of the game and whatnot. So I do like to treat the lore as seriously as I can, even if some of my theories are definitely on the more speculative side and the more crackpot side. I do like to stay as grounded to the text as I can. And with all that being said, I am working on like my last hurrah. Oh no, this is the crackpot theory that everyone doesn't want to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway before the DLC happens because things are likely to change and that might impact my understanding. But, you know, this is the last time I can offer it because I've been very reticent to do so for many reasons. And you guys will probably see that if I ever finish what I'm working on. I've actually made some pretty good progress so far as the script goes. It's coming along a lot more swimmingly, maybe because I just kind of care less overall and I have an approaching deadline and other stuff that I'm trying to take care of. And, you know, if I have ADHD, all you ever really need is a damn deadline to set the ball rolling, which is not the best thing for like content creation in terms of like video production and editing, because there are like finite amounts of things you can do per day to have that stuff go. But for writing, at least, I kind of need that pressure of a deadline, I guess. You call him Mr. Babylon? I like that. Anticipated. John Ring doesn't have the same ring as John Souls. Elgin John? Oh no. Elgin Don. Thank you, Lavish. Quelaag says they found Quelaag's biggest critics are the people who just don't want her theories to be true because they're invested in a narrative that confirms their biases and how they want the world to be. I mean, I think we're kind of all like that to a little bit of a degree. Maybe some people are like more charitable than others, but yeah, I mean, I'm going to be real here. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of it is because she's a woman. Because I have seen like some derogatory comments about like not just her, but like female content creators, especially in like the lore space or like YouTubers, which is just stupid to me. But yeah, it's complicated. It sucks. But I mean, I'm sure you could say the same thing about me to a degree. I know I certainly have my detractors, and I've certainly made enemies on my path to being a lore tuber. But it just comes with the territory if you're going to have public opinions, that you're going to have people that disagree with you. So yeah, I'm not too worried. If she turns out to be right, that's great. If she turns out to be wrong, I mean, I'm still going to enjoy the fun of kind of going on this journey with her and all these other content creators as they produce their videos. But I do think in a broader sense that Ella Delia is kind of on the money, that we have had a lot of extra videos crop up, really speculating, cashing in on that hype. But like I was just saying a moment ago, it's all part of the game. I don't really begrudge anybody. And these people are probably also genuinely excited about the DLC, and with it kind of being around the corner, it's just like fresh in their mind, and they would like make their videos while they can. So I really can't begrudge anybody as long as I think that they're approaching the lore in a reasoned manner. Elden asks, do you want to share a bit of your theory? All right. I'll share a bit of my theory with you guys, but for longtime viewers of the channel or members of the Discord, I'm pretty sure you already know where this is going with it, except it's going to be a lot more robust. I will be talking about the Crucible as I see it. Hey, Doggo, nice to see you again. Galamoth said somebody decided to name the painter in Dark Souls 3 and that really bothered you. I always kind of called him Ariamis. Or do you mean the painter girl? Yeah, I never thought of a name for her. We're all tarnished in this together, lost trying to find our way. Nicely said, Christopher. Appreciate that. Jesse said, you discovered me through some lore tubers referencing my translations. In general, people seem to respect you. So I think there's like always, you know, push and pull to it. But yeah, generally speaking, I think I'm in a pretty good spot. I enjoy being a bit of a smaller channel and kind of having a smaller community that I have, because it's kind of easier to bounce off you guys and not let things get carried away too far. I generally don't like to watch a lot of like really big streamers, just because I like to have the more personal interactions with chat and stuff. So I am a little bit worried like what'll happen if my channel does grow like exponentially. Like certainly the culture is going to change. The culture of my community has sort of changed slightly as the years have gone by, but I mean, generally speaking, like the approach has been the same, and I would hope I'd be able to continue that if I did like blow up somehow, in a figurative sense. All right, so I definitely appreciate all the comments, but I feel like I won't be able to keep up with them all, so I'm just gonna dive back into the video.
So there is definitely like a vague timeline that we can break apart in Elden Ring, based off of the sigils and how the depiction of the Elden Ring has changed over the course of history. I would say the biggest point, or the biggest difference, is that there used to be 4 equidistant rings, and the 4th most southern ring is then absorbed into the center to become what's called the Anchor Rune, which is then owned by Godric in the story, but it's kind of uncertain. It's kind of uncertain like how this changes anything. All we know is that there's just like a big disparity between the rune that is depicted in Farum Azula and then the rune that's depicted from the ancient Erdtree era onward into the fundamentalist era, which we know now. But we're going to talk about that. And I'm going to talk about everything that predates the Erdtree and Erdtree burials. I'm going to be talking...
So maybe I'll spill the beans more on like my Crucible thoughts as the video goes on, because I'll admit I was not expecting this about the butterflies, but you know, that's perfectly fine. And you guys have pretty much heard all of my, or well, let's just say most of my tangents about it, because like a lot of stuff relies on translation, which is hard to just like spitball about live without like referencing the Japanese and making it understandable. So anyway, setting all that stuff aside, I'm going to imagine that I'm going to have pretty big disagreements, civil disagreements about the delineation of the timeline and the ages here. So I might just reserve a lot of my personal thoughts, because they probably really aren't going to be relevant to Quelaag's points, maybe, but I'm sure I'm going to eat my words now and can't resist later on. So, hey Bella, nice to see you again. Quelaag says the butterflies are a huge rabbit hole. Wouldn't it be? I guess butterflies don't make holes. All right, I'll shut up.
Talking about all of the magic that talks about like in an era before the Erdtree, or like, you know, magic that exists outside of the purview of the Erdtree. We're going to be talking about ancestral followers. We're going to be talking about deathrite birds, the godskins, the Gloamite queen. I need to set the foundations for everything so that way you guys know what I'm talking about. Because there's a couple of folks who have rolled up into my streams and have had no idea who the fuck we're talking about. So let's get this established. So for those of you that are unfamiliar, there is a specific unique icon asset that is on the map called the Uld Palace. I know that because of translation, this could also be translated into like Palace or Uld Palace. I've seen like variants and interpretations or translations, but is like very similar to you know, ancient Mesopotamia. I'll talk about that. We're going to talk about like the visual design and like visual inspiration for these areas, but pretty much there is like this ancient dynasty that used to exist.
So Ul is the one thing. What's the other ancient dynasty kingdom called? Is it Erd, like URD? Let me just type that in. Or does it even have a place on the map? Maybe it doesn't. Hold on. Huh. I guess there are no Erd spots on the map. It's just Ul. Yeah, so I'm not sure what she's talking about. I mean, she probably has a reason for saying this. I'm not trying to imply that she doesn't. I'm just unfamiliar with the contention here. So this is very clearly like Udu. As far as like Uld, it'd be, let's look at that. ULD? Could. Oh no, this is going to be terrible. Fudge. Let me see if chat said anything about that. Old and old. Fudge. Okay, let's do a space. All right, then. Let's do a space here. Damn it. That did not. Anyway, old dynasty. All right, I'm not finding anything, which doesn't mean that isn't there. I just don't remember anything which really references the old specifically. And my spreadsheet might not have it. I might need to check the Carian archive. I'll figure it out. So anyway, I'm gonna double listen to what she said because I was wondering if she was trying to compare it to like Eld as in Elden, which doesn't seem to work out because it's Erdtree. So even like old, I'm assuming would be Urudal rather than whatever. So yeah, let me just back it up real quick.
Is like very similar to, ancient Mesopotamia. I'll talk about that. We're going to talk about like the visual design.
Okay, yeah. So if it relates to like old ass country names, I'm probably not going to be the best at trying to decipher what that is off my head. So I would probably need to like look that stuff up. All right. See, ask old/ul, is it the same dynasty? Maybe. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think so because they have like pretty much identical ruins, I think. When you talk about the Mesopotamian thing, it's Okay, so if it is I mean, the Japanese might refer to it a completely different way depending on when that concept got introduced to the country. So, setting that aside, if it is just like Uru, yeah, it would be kind of congruent with the old palace ruins. So where did I put my spreadsheet? Oh. Yeah, Udu would definitely be good enough for you are. So, alright. Elden asks, do you think the Blackstone civilization is its own thing, or can it be tied to the old dynasty, do you think? I could kind of see it going either way, but as far as like the architecture is concerned, FromSoft doesn't often have two really highly contrasting architectural styles for like the same kingdom unless it's meant to represent a different like epoch of that kingdom or like a different age. And all of the Blackstone stuff is way more ubiquitous than the old stuff, which leads me to believe it's probably its own thing. Maybe if we had more golems in the palace ruins in places, and I could be more on board with the theory. But for now, I think they're probably different. But that's a good question. All right.
And like visual inspiration for these areas. But pretty much there is like this ancient dynasty that used to exist. Tarnished Archaeologist also has a video on them. I want to amplify that and boost that as well. And I'm going to talk about some of Tarnished Archaeologist's findings in addition to my own during this section. So check out that video. I'm going to link it in the description below. But pretty much there is this ancient dynasty that used to exist, and a lot of different groups worship this this entity or like worship in the ruins of this group. And it's different than the Noxtella and Nokron. It's like different than the Eternal Cities. It's its own thing, and it predates the Eternal Cities by like several thousand years based off of like the architecture if we're just looking at like the historical allegories. So a lot of the architecture is based off of like...
Right, and so we actually just had some questions about that from the chat, and who just asked it? I'm blind. Yeah, Ryushun is asking, could the Ul and Uld be related to the Nox somehow? I think if you want to say somehow, maybe, but I would definitely agree with Quelaag's assessment here that as far as the architecture is concerned, like the stuff that you find with the Ul dynasty is way more ancient than what I think you would get with the Nox stuff. So it leads me to believe that these predate them by a significant margin. Hey, Warm Coffee and Umbra Watcher and Corn, welcome to the stream.
like it's based off of ancient Mesopotamian and like Babylonian architecture. So, for example, we have Jordan that's being represented. We have the Tigris and the Euphrates that's being represented. I do think that the Ancestral River Well and the Shiofer River Well are like a multifaceted allegory. I think that they're both representative of the Tigris and the Euphrates, but I also think that they're representative of the Nordic river wells in Nordic mythology, and I'll talk about that too. But a lot of the architecture.
Yeah, so as far as Gelmir is concerned, it might come from Gelmir, which is kind of like a Norse river that's supposed to go into, I think, the Well of Mimir or something like that. And so there is kind of a lot of those cross-cultural parallels that might be worth considering in tandem to just like the etymological roots of the names of these rivers and whatnot.
Architecture and like ruins are taken from like actual Babylonian ruins. So we have Jordan being represented here. We have the black obelisk that's being represented, although I talk about this in another video, but the reliefs that are like being depicted are different. So they fully like ripped this asset, like they scanned it and like put it in the game, but the thing that's different are these pieces right here. They changed the reliefs here, but everything from like here down is like the actual asset itself. There is cuneiform, which is like the ancient language that is depicted on this section. You can kind of see it right here. But yeah, there's cuneiform in the game. There is like ancient Hebrew in the game. There's like a bunch of different languages that are in the game. So it's really cool to see all of these like historical references, like kind of helping us get an idea of where things sit on a timeline, because I do.
So yeah, I definitely appreciate having the real world parallel right next to that. As far as like the languages used in the game and like on the obelisks, that's perfectly fine. But I am kind of reminded of the time of the time people noticed the asset of a Coke bottle in an Arabic Coke bottle in Dark Souls 1. So sometimes everything isn't quite as straightforward as it seems. But to be fair, I think like the Arabic Coke bottle was like literally part of a trash asset in Dark Souls 1 rather than anything more significant than an obelisk. But I just wanted to share that thought because it like popped in my head. So I do try to take this stuff in stride, but I am also very skeptical because a lot of things have been repurposed or used from different things, or were completely bought on third-party like software websites that means they aren't necessarily custom designed for Elden Ring, which doesn't mean that they don't have significance, but the fact that we've seen certain pillars come from other games like Path of Exile that show up in LFIL, I think that does make me want to tap on the brakes a little bit than going all gas for this kind of visual analysis at times. Textures of the gutter in DS2. Oh yeah, Heineken's in Dark Souls 2. I don't think I knew about the Heineken's for Dark Souls 2, but definitely goes in theme with the gutter. Christopher Jenkins has always wanted to visit and see something like that, so the architecture is nice to see. Yeah, I would really like to see Jordan up front and a lot of the archaeological remains in places like ancient Egypt and whatnot. I was very fascinated by that stuff as a kid, watching like the History Channel before it turned into like people being abducted by aliens. Yeah, and Ismao says the human statues in Fair Missoula are from Bloodborne. Yeah, and even those statues are taken from real life examples. One is of Charlemagne the Great, the other is the Virgin of Paris in Notre Dame. There's a whole ass tire in Dark Souls 2's gutter. Time flows weirdly in Jank Lake, you guess. Well, time is convoluted there. Alright, you guys felt the same way about the History Channel? Alright, sweet.
I do think that by utilizing these like ancient civilizations, we're able to kind of evoke this like feeling of, or like the developers are able to evoke this feeling of, this is very old. Like this is very old. And it's very clear that like based off of the materials that they used and based off of everything else that it's older than the Eternal Cities. So it's a cool way to allow history to inform your art and to like create a feeling without necessarily like explicitly stating in the lore anywhere that they're older than the Eternal Cities, it's just visually obvious that they're older than the Eternal Cities. So I think it's incredibly important to like break that down and differentiate them. The Eternal Cities also have a different icon on the map than these ruins. So these ruins are incredibly important because the ancestral followers like post up in these ruins, and so does Moog, and like a lot of the Mogwin dynasty omen that like follow him, they also post up in these ruins. So there's a bunch of different groups that are more modern that are trying to like embrace older practices, because these older practices embrace them and have room for them, whereas the Erdtree fundamentalist order doesn't. The Erdtree fundamentalist order doesn't allow them to exist how they want to because of that system of rules that have been put into place. And I think it has a lot to do with the Rune of Dust and Death being sealed and with death being processed differently. So let me break this down really quick. The ancestral followers have a belief where they'll actually like do sacrificial rituals, and they'll kill people that don't experience what's called budding. Sorry, big Cooper snore. They'll kill individuals that aren't experiencing budding. So hold on, let me actually go over here. So this is a budding horn, and this is the ancestral spirit horn. It says this horn began to sprout on a beast that typically bears no horn. Perhaps it's a vestige of the primordial crucible. And then if you read the ancestral spirit, like the regal ancestral spirit horn, it says, a number of new growths bud from the antler-like horns of the fallen king, each glowing with light. Thus does new life grow from death, and from death one obtains power. So this is incredibly important. The antlers are like this petrified gray looking color, and then leaves are sprouting from this. And there's also like a really cool mechanic that the regal ancestral spirit has as like a boss mechanic. I know a lot of people will be over leveled or like over-tuned when they encounter this boss sometimes, to the point where like they don't get to see this mechanic happen. I actually missed this mechanic the first time that I went through, but if you're fighting the regal ancestral spirit, it'll actually sacrifice all of the animals in the arena, because there's like spirit animals running around. It'll sacrifice all those animals and absorb it, and like when it absorbs those animals, it regens hit points. So it's really cool. There's like,
not only that, apparently like changes its attacks based on the animals that it's absorbed. And I didn't notice this until I saw Hawkshaw's color theory video, because maybe I killed the regal ancestor too quickly. But I at least saw the drain HP attack from the nearby fauna. But yeah, so pretty much I'm agreeing with almost everything she's saying right now. And hey, Sohelanthropus, nice to see you again. Galaxy Dragon hates that mechanic. Jay Dixon asks, do we ever know if the Eternal Cities were topside? Technically, no, we don't. So there are some people who believe that the cities were underground already when they were destroyed, but it is unclear. And with that being said, they might not need Eternal Cities up above ground if like Celia is originally a Nox settlement. Maybe it just didn't have the designator of Eternal City, but was functionally a colony or something along those lines. Yushin asks, what if the old are banished to the underground too, and one of the reasons they exist in the game is to show that the Nox weren't the first civilization to question the greater will and be banished? That's a really good question. For what it's worth, I was a little bit surprised Quelaag didn't bring it up, and I was going to let it go, but this might be relevant to the kind of train of thought that we're on right now. I'm just trying to remember how it's phrased specifically. Okay, I think I remember. All right. So there is a spoken echo of America. I don't remember where this one is. This might be in Bellum Church, but I just don't remember where like some of these more secondary quotes are. Anyway, in America's own words, the Erdtree governs all. The choice is thine. Become one with the order, or divest thyself of it. To wallow at the fringes, a powerless upstart. So this is a really small set of dialogue here, and I think this is really impactful for how America seemed to govern the lands between. So she's essentially saying my way or the highway, but she doesn't necessarily seem to just kill those who don't fall in line with her. She kind of seems to banish them to put them on the fringes as powerless upstarts, which might tie into like the whole Banished Knight movement. I also think this potentially ties into the Ancestral followers because they kind of exist beyond the purview of the Erdtree. So there is a kind of pseudo subspace for them, but definitely not part of the order there. So that might tie into what Quelaag is talking about. Ryushin says, the old palace ruins seem younger and more intact than the old. I don't remember which is which, to be honest. No, I would definitely agree that the cultures seem to follow like more ancient or primitive practices, Mal. Ol is the underground one. Uld is the one overground in Liurnia. What is that place called? I would like need to look up my map or something because I don't remember. Let's do this again. Hopefully it bring me to the top. Damn it, I'm like way in the middle. Memory. Alright, so let me try Uld again since I'm near the top. All right, no, I'm just boned. All right, I'll find it eventually. I don't think it really matters anyway. All right, and thank you for the clarification there. I appreciate that. All right.
Like this idea of spirits being like absorbed into this like container, which is like the ancestral spirit, being shown in practice, being shown in the boss fight mechanic. Ugh, stutter, sorry. But yeah, so you can kind of see on the Regal Ancestral Spirit boss, it's growing tree leaves. It's like the gray, like petrified remains growing new life, which is such a cool visual motif. I love to see it. But there's this like weird antler horn. It looks like moose antlers. And it says, in the Ancestral Spirit worshipping faith, these are considered envoys' wings, made to reap the lives of beings which experience no sprouting. So these were like part of the sacrificial ritual where they would sacrifice the beings with no horns. There's also the priestesses, the ancestral spirit priestesses who like post up in the old palace ruins, and they're typically facing these like petrified trees, and they're singing to the trees, and they're holding up the, I think they're holding up a horn, or they're holding up like the infant head. But they're like praying, and they're usually surrounded by animals, usually rats or stags or whatever. The males will sometimes like stomp, and that's their like dance ritual thing that they do. But you can also find them, I think another really cool fun fact is you can also find them around the petrified trees that are in the consecrated snowfield.
You gotta love the Blizzard visual effects, making this look desaturated or like high contrast as hell. Or is this low contrast? Whatever, you know what I mean.
This was a really difficult picture for me to get because the blizzard makes it like incredibly hard to see, but you can see them worshiping the trees in this area as well. So
fun fact, apparently talking to plants legitimately helps them grow. So maybe there might be some diegetic reason for why these shamans are singing to plant life, potentially. Although, of course, not all of the shamans are like specifically like beckoning plants. Although honestly the biggest thing that bothers me about the damn ancestral followers is that we've got a bunch of them up top next to the minor Erdtree in Liurnia on the eastern side of the map by the Frenzied Flame Tower, or Frenzied Flame Village rather. So what the hell's going on there? Weren't they supposed to avoid contact with the Erdtree? It almost seems like those ones are worshipping it. But before I became more familiar with the lore and like actually paid more attention to the gestures, I was like, oh, maybe they're doing like fire spurn me on and they like want it to burn. No, they're just doing like their weird little shaman dance. So I think I would need to double check the dialogue, or rather the text about the ancestrals, because maybe it's more specifically that the spirits, the deers essentially avoid the Erdtree, and maybe that doesn't talk about the followers specifically, but nonetheless it still bothers me that they're up there. Galamoth actually really likes the consecrated snowfield. I was thinking about this the other day on stream when we were complaining about it. It's like, I really don't mind, and I actually kind of like the Tomb of the Fallen Giants in Dark Souls 1, and you can't see anything there, but I really hated the frigid outskirts of Dark Souls 2, and I wasn't that big of a fan of the consecrated snowfield. And I don't really know why. I mean, maybe it's like the Dragonkin. It just felt way more stressful being there than other areas of the world. Yeah, I think a large part of it would have been the Dragonkin because it felt like I couldn't fully explore that area and map it out mentally, which is why I might be more okay with Tomb of the Fallen Giants because I feel like once you kind of explore it, it makes sense. Like, I don't know. There's nothing quite as imposing there. And Frigid Outskirts, I mean, it also has the same problem where they just have ultimately or infinitely respawning enemies, which is super cool. I guess that's a pun. Stella says maybe it's the atmospherics. Maybe I'm not okay with the whiteness of snow, but I'm fine with the dark. Scallyzy said, if you had a nickel for every time FromSoft game had a snowy area with only one good piece of loot in it, they'd have like 8 nickels. I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're including like the Kingsfield games, you might be right. But I think there's only like 2 really big snowy areas for the modern Soulsborns. Alden said, playing Tomb of the Giants that's fully lit up in a mod is an experience. I have no idea what that is. That sounds very interesting. I mean, it probably makes that area seem trivial in comparison, but yeah. Yeah, City brings up a good point in that at least a lantern can light up the darkness, but a whiteout is a different kind of disorienting. For what it's worth, the first time I did go through Tomb of the Fallen Giants, it was before I had the lantern. So I still kind of dealt with it and got where I needed to. Yeah, I kind of agree, True Connoisseur, that you wish the snow would dissipate once you got through and you could just explore freely afterward. Maybe they felt that could have been too cheesy and they just kind of like went with what they did. But nonetheless, I think it's even like weirder when you go outside of the loading distance for the consecrated snowfield and you can see it without any snow in certain parts of the game. And then when you go there, it just like starts snowing again. So just that kind of inconsistency bothers me, although it's just kind of normal. Yeah. All right. So I thought there was like another comment or two up above. Where's my mouse? All right. Oh yeah. So Anticipated was saying that these things might look like deathbirds. I thought Quelaag was going to go there. I might have stopped the video early, but I think she's going to make that point in a little bit here.
So it definitely seems like there'll be both topside and underside around the Old Palace ruins. You could find them in the Labyrinth, topside and Liurnia, kind of like kicking it around the Elden John statues. But you could also find them, you know, in the Undercities doing the same thing. They just love to be around this idea of like sacrificial sprouting, growing trees out of the self, cultivating this like spiritual material into like a spirit tree. And I'm going to be using the term spirit tree from here on out. But this is really cool because it actually ties in with a real world myth in Nordic mythology that has to do with this big stag. I'm going to be using its English name because I'm really, really bad at a lot of these older names, but Oakthorny is this stag that eats the leaves off of the Yggdrasil, and there's a lot of poems about how there's like celestial dew or like these celestial waters that then come off of its horns. And I've seen it described in multiple different ways. I've seen it described as like it is coming from the elk itself, like it's coming off of the elk's horns itself. But I've also seen it described as like it is like catching the dew of like the fresh morning, like the sun is rising, and you know, like when you see dew on like grass in the morning, it's like that, and it's shedding off of the antlers of these like great stags and creating.
I think most people in chat are probably going to be more familiar with dew from mountains, but no, in all seriousness, one thing that I have wondered in particular about like this whole spirit dew, spirit mist, whatever you want to call it, which comes from the ancestral spirits, spirit vapor. You kind of get this stuff potentially in a place like the Spirit Calling Snail Cave, which has like the Okina follower dude. I don't remember his name in that cave because they usually play HUDless. It also has the Godskin duo sort of fights where they're like the spirit form, so you can't really bleed them or ice them. You can only sleep the spirits. And I wondered if Spirit Calling Snails became Spirit Calling Snails because of like that spirit vapor, but then that idea kind of fell apart when I looked into like the Erdtree region and we didn't see any spirit vapor there that could like justify that opinion. So with that being said, there is probably something more to spirit vapor that I should try to look into, but as far as like textual support, there's almost nothing beyond the Ancestral Infant Skull, which is pretty vexing. But one thing that I've noticed is that in Liurnia of the Lakes, which is kind of imbued with glintstone everywhere, the trees which grow out of that water have the more green leaves, whereas trees everywhere else, more or less, are yellow or kind of orange, which might show influence from the Erdtree. And so there might be a gold component for like runes and the Erdtree, and maybe a glintstone / spiritual components for things like water and stars that might be worth exploring more. Although I say that, but I honestly don't feel like there's really enough to make out what pretty much anything like worthwhile at this point until we get extra
the river wells of
extra content to support it. All right. Chris says, good point. You never found out what those snail snake things were about, except their shells being made into spirit calling bells. Wait, what? I didn't even notice that their shells are made into spirit calling bells. Let me look it up. Or do you mean like the wraith ones? Because I thought those were more flowers. Where would that even be? I don't know if I have a picture of that. So yeah, I might not have a really good close-up of these snails specifically. Damn it. Oh wait, no, I do. Just looks like an amorphous blob almost. With their blue snake eyes. It does also really bother me that there are like spirit crystallians, kind of. Spirit ashes are just weird in general. Like, how the hell is there those who live in death spirit ash? Galamoth says Mountain Dew keeps them up at night. No idea why. All right. All right, let's go back to the video.
Cutting off of the antlers of these like great stags and creating the river wells of the entire world. So the fact that we have like the Ancestral river well and the Siofra river well kind of like flowing through relates to this myth and relates to the ancestral spirit, which I think is really cool. So we have 3 different myths happening. We have Celtic myth with the naming conventions of Ancestral and Siofra. We have Nordic myth with the giant stags, and we have Babylonian myth with a lot of.
And I'm a little bit surprised she hasn't brought up the Hever Gelmir thing, since Gelmir as in like Mount Gelmir.
The what are they? The Oracle Bubble Boys. I'm gonna link a thread down below for those of you that are interested in those guys. Content creator Little Church Lore made a whole Twitter thread on like the lore and historical references regarding the Bubble Boys. I'm gonna call them that in the Riverwell. There's a lot of like really cool.
Little Church Lore is in the server. Do they make videos, or is it all like Twitter stuff? Because I mean, I'm gonna need to look it up because I think I've only ever seen things from Twitter, and I don't really use Twitter, so a lot of stuff has probably passed me by.
Myths regarding them, but that is like a whole ass other video that I can make, and I don't want to get into that right now. So I'm gonna link that in the description down below if you're interested. But yeah, so we have this era pre-Erdtree burials, And so we have one way that death is processed is through this like death rite ritual. Another way that death is processed, and something else I also want to point out too, this is something that Vati actually pointed out to me, but the
would this be, no, this looks more like a flower to me than a spirit snail shell.
And something else I also want to point out too, this is something that Vati actually pointed out to me, but the Great Horn ritual staff actually does look like Deathrite bird wings. And even though it's saying that, or even though it says that, you know, this is like obviously created from a horn, it says this is the item description, a distinctive horn. It does say that these are considered envoy's wings, and the Deathrite birds, as well as the twin birds, are considered the envoys of death. The twin birds are the mother of the Deathrite birds, and the twin birds are like quite fascinating. They're depicted all over Farum Azula, which Farum Azula is where we find this version of the Elden Ring. And Farum Azula is a giant floating mausoleum. Specifically, Tarnished archaeologists pointed out that this is inspired by the necropolis of Varna, which is like a very, very, very ancient necropolis. I want to say that one is about like 5000 BC. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Double check that, because I actually don't remember off the top of my head. But it's very, very ancient. So we have this whole visual, like, whoever is the art director of these games is fucking cracked. Point blank period. Like, they really nailed all of these like ancient older societies as like either like the advent of human language or pre-language.
And I definitely agree with that assessment. And I think one of the most brilliant parts about the kind of world building of FromSoft games is that even if you don't know a damn thing about archaeology, you can kind of just feel it by looking at the different buildings and their styles. Like the old and Ul stuff look way more ancient than the Nox stuff, which might kind of look more ancient than maybe Leyndell, but that's kind of where we get into the bit of the ambiguities of the timeline and whatnot. But maybe, okay, a better gap bridger might be like the old dynasty ruins and the black stone ones, then the kind of nondescript ruins which you can find all over the lands between, which I think could potentially relate to the astrologers, but you know, that's not really too important. Just like all the stone ones, like the Churches of America, that kind of civilization. And then the more modern ones, like the wooden houses and Leyndell and Celia. So, yeah.
And like the way that death is processed in all of these is very like pagan. It's like very like...
Oh yeah, and then Oddspace is thinking that it's a bit of a reach to compare the antlers of the follower weapon to the wings of the Deathbird. I honestly don't think it's that much of a reach, because this is a very low-tech civilization, relatively speaking here, and I think this could be more of a representation of an idea than meant to be like a literal rendering of a Deathbird, because it has like... The weapon is used for a specific purpose for like the Ancestral followers' rites, and so it would make sense that they weren't trying to put like feathers of a bird and whatnot to make a functional tool that is meant to represent death at the same time. So while I definitely can see why that idea wouldn't grip so many people, I think it just kind of works out for me.
Like associated with like this natural cycle of life and death. There's a lot of animal depiction. There's a lot of just like really awesome stuff that is cool and neat to consider. Oh, another little dealie, the spiral columns that I talked about in the DLC breakdown video, those also are from this area too. So it's cool that we're seeing, it's Jerusalem. It's cool that we're seeing like all of this architecture that is like referencing this particular area and like this era of history. I love it. It's cool. So anyway, after this not after this era, I want to talk about the Gloam-eyed Queen. That's right. So we talked about the Deathrite birds. Deathrite birds were in charge of burning the dead before Erdtree burials were a thing. So in the time when there was no Erdtree, death was burned in ghost flame. Death birds were the keepers of that fire. And then the entities that were in charge of death indiscriminate, so like the death of gods, because gods were also mortal during this time. There was no immortal god the Godskin Noble, the Godskin Nobles and the Godskin Apostle and the Gloam Queen were all in charge of dealing with the death of the gods. So we have the Death Rite who are like just in charge of mortality, and then we have...
So I am curious where she's drawing that distinction from. Maybe if... Okay, I could see how this could work if one believes that the gods were more akin to dragons, which are kind of like timeless. I could buy into that, but then I feel like that doesn't necessarily match up with the depiction of the quote-unquote gods we do see on the Nobles and Apostles set. So maybe she'll establish why she feels the gods were immortal even in like the prehistoric of times here.
Like these human entities that are in charge of death indiscriminate. So like you are not above mortality, even if you're a god. It's death indiscriminate. Everybody deserves a chance.
Oh yeah, never mind.
Like there needs to be cycles of life and death. And it's like a part of the natural cycle of everything. So something that I think is really important is the fact that like the Death Rite are associated as a time before the Erdtree, and the nobles are the most ancient apostles who have assimilated in human physiology, not unlike the Crucible, the Erdtree in its primordial form. There is this idea of like a primordial Erdtree that's referenced throughout the game. Some people call it the Great Tree. Some people debate whether or not the Great Tree even existed. I'm definitely of the mindset that there is like a primordial... There's like a primordial version of the Erdtree, and I think that it changes to the Erdtree at some point in history, and I think that line exists right here. Maybe?
So this is one of the most hotly debated topics, at least for my channel and my server specifically, because I am of the opinion that the Erdtree is the Erdtree and there isn't necessarily a primordial version of it, which I'll talk about in like my next video. But most other people don't approach the lore that way, because I feel like the Japanese is specifically what allows for the interpretation that I would peddle, and the English kind of forces this view that there must have been something to predate the Erdtree that's Crucible related, because of the term primordial that's used in conjunction with it in English, kind of having a set specific meaning, whereas the Japanese is more akin to like the first, the beginning, or the original, which by all counts can mean primordial in a certain context when you're talking about like the history of time and stuff like that. But original, first, beginning, etc. doesn't necessarily imply that it needed to be there at the beginning of time, or like anything quite as strong as the English version of primordial would imply. So that's kind of its own separate tangent. So I am of the opinion that when we're told about the birth of the Erdtree kind of coinciding with the war against the giants and whatnot, that's what I would consider to be like the actual establishment of the Erdtree, and I don't think there is a version of the Erdtree specifically which predates that. And with all that being said, I am open to what's the word? Future content giving us more information which can redefine my thoughts on the matter. But the long story short, which I'll talk about in the video, is that there really is no explicit reference to a pre-Erdtree or a primordial Crucible that predates anything having to do with Godfrey in the Japanese text, which is a very how do I explain it? I don't want to say like thought-provoking, but it's certainly provocative, not like eye-opening. Anyway, it'll be very hard for people to change their minds and try to reframe their expectations of the Crucible and the Erdtree with this paradigm, just because we've had so much time to consider the Erdtree in a completely different context. So I don't really expect a lot of people to support the idea or even be on board or even like be able to entertain it fairly. And part of the reason why I say this is because it took me like 2 months or maybe even like longer of looking at the text of Elden Ring between both languages, comparing, contrasting, recomparing, double checking if I'm right, trying to get all the context before I even came up with this conclusion. Because for months, like most people, I thought the primordial Crucible was kind of like a primordial soup of life. But over time, my opinion changed as I was looking through Crucible-related items. So with all that being said, and hey, V-Limit, thanks for the thumbs up and the thumbs down. I would say that the Ancient Erdtree actually is the Crucible, and this is the Crucible / Erdtree, more specifically during Godfrey's time. And then after its blessings faded, it became the period of Erdtree worship. I don't know if I would still consider this the Crucible, but it's, you know, kind of neither here nor there because we don't exactly have definite time markers to kind of differentiate the two. And then I would argue Radagon, when he became Elden Lord, actually changed what was going on with the Elden Ring by including his rune behind the Elden Ring, which looks like the cross hatch pattern lattice that you get in Raya Lucaria, and that changed the time of the Crucible definitively into that of the Golden Order, or if people are more comfortable with the idea, Golden Order fundamentalism Elden Ring. So that's kind of where my stance is for now, and I'm certain many people feel very strongly about it in other ways. So, right, let me look back at the chat, and then I'll check out the video again. C asks, by gods, does Quelaag mean the demigods? Is Marika not the only god as she is the vessel for the greater will? So this would have been in the before times of the Erdtree, so the question of Marika's godhood is unstated because there could have been like Placidus Axe's fled god that existed in this time, so it's just all very ambiguous, but good question there. And I guess I should probably talk about the Erdtree and Great Tree stuff. It's a little bit tiresome, but I'll do it in a moment. So, yeah, you guys are going on. Mao always read primordial form of the Erdtree as to mean the existence of the Erdtree as a seed or a bud. And I think that's a very common counterpoint that people bring up to it. So like they might say, maybe it wasn't the Erdtree, but that doesn't mean the Erdtree in its final form. It could just be like the seed, as Mao says. However, if you want to go that route, I think you would also need to recontextualize what exactly the birth of the Erdtree means in like the smithing stones, which could technically mean like the adult form of it. But I just don't like that kind of a linguistic ambiguity, which isn't to say that it's wrong. That's just kind of like my personal tastes on that specifically there. Then Doggo asks about the big stump. I'll probably leave that alone for a while just because that's kind of a different tangent for now. Alice, I didn't say hello to you earlier, but welcome to the stream. You think the meat tree is the Crucible / old Erdtree, then it ossified into the Erdtree proper, where it remained until it was burned in the first flame. From there, the Golden Order takes hold. I mean, especially with the addition of the story trailer, I am very willing to reconsider these thoughts and entertain new things. And I did have those kind of thoughts on my first impressions, but pretty much all of the Crucible iconography is related to Godfrey more explicitly, which tends to lead into my idea that it's tied to the Ancient Erdtree. For instance, all of the Crucible aspect incantations use Ancient Erdtree iconography, and it seems to me like if this Ancient Erdtree meant an Erdtree before like the Erdtree that we know about it, I could be kind of more content with thinking of a pre-Erdtree Crucible than the one that we have. But it seems like Godfrey is in tandem with this Ancient Erdtree stuff and not this stuff, which kind of leads me to believe the Crucible itself is the Ancient Erdtree. And so, with that being said, as far as like all of the sacrifices, I see the appeal in thinking that that would be the Crucible. I'm just not entirely sure yet because I don't know if the Crucible does actually predate the rise of Marika and Godfrey and their Erdtree. Friend Alex, welcome back to the stream. The descriptions talk about the Crucible as if it's a totally different thing in a way, but historically, new groups in power usually like to point to a through line for their own legitimacy. And I think that through line is the Erdtree itself, and we've got like the Ghost, which says like the Erdtree is the heart of the Golden Order, Corrin says that to Goldmask at one point when like Goldmask is doubting things like the perfection of the Golden Order. But one of the most prominent examples which I point to in like the change of state of the Erdtree would be in, how am I forgetting? Is it the Seed Talismans? I talk about this a lot on my Grace of Old video. Pulling up the text now. Okay, yeah. So the Crimson and Cerulean Seed Talismans say that the Erdtree was once perfect and eternal, and thus was it believed that Erdtree seeds could not exist, which is perfectly fine on its own. However, we have a couple other descriptions which kind of seem to contradict that if one believes that the Erdtree started out perfect and eternal due to the removal of destined death. And those descriptions would be Erdtree Heal and Blessing of the Erdtree because they share flavor text. It says, the Erdtree once flourished with abundance, yet it was only for a fleeting moment. Such is the course of all life. Now, if it was only this part of the text, I could see why people would think that the Erdtree just kind of aged, but doesn't necessarily need to die. But the fact that the final line says, such is the course of all life, suggests to me that there was a time in which the Erdtree was indeed like all life, and it was fleeting, which means it was not eternal. And that's why I think there had to have been a fundamental change in the nature of the Erdtree. And I see that coinciding with the Age of Abundance into the Erdtree worship era. So like its blessings faded, and now it's kind of like entering its twilight years and its autumn or its fall, and is kind of on its way to death. And that might be when Marika's like, oh crap, this is not the age of life that I envisioned. So I'm going to search the depths of the Golden Order to increase the bounty of our grace, because the bounty was fading away. And that's why the Golden Order came up around this time. And of course, that kind of presupposes the notion that destined death would have been removed later on in Marika's reign than the beginning. So these are going to be some like quintessential disagreements that I have with Quelaag's video here. But again, this is definitely something that's, more of my opinion and views points. And I know many people disagree with me, even in the chat, which is perfectly fine here. And then Santeria, nice to see you again. Eladelia thinks it's worth entertaining the idea that something like primordial form of the Erdtree could mean something more like the equivalent than form, and it's the thing that served in the role. I have thought that as well, but there is some other textual stuff to lead me to believe that the Crucible is the Erdtree, and part of that ties back into the imagery that's associated with the Crucible more explicitly with the ancient Erdtree, the Crucible Knight's armor, and Ordovus' greatsword, Siluria's tree, etc. So I'll get into the Great Tree stuff in a moment. I just want to catch up with you guys here. Gidelag says, you hate how the Erdtree is born. It's a tree. How the hell can it be born? So, I mean, this is kind of metaphorical language. I don't necessarily think the tree came out of a womb or anything like that. It's relatively speaking, like you could say like the birth of something is like when it started or began, and it wasn't necessarily like gestated. And Scalezi thinks it wasn't called the Erdtree until Marika started her order. So that's kind of why I bring up the whole like birth comment in relation to that idea, because I'd wondered that myself, but the terminology for like the birth of the Erdtree and the beginning of their epoch of life is just very curious to me. Oddspace asks, what's more important, the Erdtree or the Elden Ring? So I would say the Elden Ring, and I often make the comparison of like squares and rectangles. So if the square is a specific kind of rectangle, I would say the Erdtree is a kind of specific shape to the order of the Elden Ring, which would be, the kind of bigger rectangle there. Could you elaborate, Chris? I'm not sure what you're making with the natural born points. So as far as natural born goes, if you want to talk about the linguistics of that, it might be a George R.R. Martinism to just mean bastard, but the Japanese is more akin to like the bastard or the spawn of darkness. rather than anything that was like naturally born. Believe it or not. All right, so I'm gonna switch topics a bit since it came up earlier, and this is kind of always a pain to talk about because I mean, well, let's be fair here. What isn't a pain to talk about in Elden Ring? So, all right, this is a compilation of all the times that Great Tree, or is this all of the times? I'm pretty confident this is all of the times that the term Great Tree appears in the Japanese, and I have Great Tree corresponding to this orange color for the Japanese at times, but even if it is orange at spots, it isn't always just called the Great Tree in the equivalent English text. So for Dee's Dialogue in Summonwater Village and the Finger Reader Crone in Lane Dell and its outskirts, they talk about the Great Tree in Japanese, but Dee calls it the Erdtree in English, and the lady calls it Great Tree lowercase with a space in English, which is perfectly fine. So it's not quite as one-to-one between the two texts, and the Tree and Beast Surcoat also has that kind of issue. Wait, no, it doesn't. I'm lying. So anyway, the point that I want to make about this is that pretty much the terms for Great Tree and Erdtree are used synonymously despite the root resin description, and I will try to recontextualize this in a moment here. So, for all intents and purposes, for now, until we get further confirmation of another tree predating the Erdtree, I don't think there is supposed to be a difference between the Great Tree and the Erdtree based on the current form of the text. And with that being said, that does not disclude the possibility that there could have been another tree before the Erdtree, but I just wouldn't call that tree the Great Tree as it exists in this form of the text, if that makes sense. So we could call it the Olden Tree. That'd be perfectly fine with me, but I wouldn't call the Olden Tree the Great Tree because it seems very clear Great Tree equals Erdtree. Now, part of the reason I say that so forcefully would be back to the Tree and Beast Surcoat. So this would essentially be called Spanish. Okay, so you can hear me again. Right, so it looks like I might be live. Hopefully I am until I get more chat confirmation. Perfectly normal operating function of OBS. Yeah. All right. Okay, so it looks like I am good now. All right, sweet. So sorry for that rude interruption by OBS there. I'm going to restate my point from the Great Tree line in the Tree and Beast Surcoat because I got cut off. So the reason I would say so forcefully that the Olden Tree would not be the Great Tree is because of the Tree and Beast Surcoat's Japanese description. This is essentially called the Great Tree and Beast Surcoat in Japanese, and the second paragraph here makes it very clear what it refers to. It says the surcoat depicts the distant Erdtree and the Beast Regent, blah, blah, blah. So as for the surcoat, it represents the distant Golden Tree, which means the Erdtree. So for all intents and purposes, this firmly establishes Great Tree equals Erdtree. Now, I think this is kind of corroborated in Deathroot and the Prince of Death's pustule in a roundabout way, even though root resin does make them sound like completely distinct and different things here. So for Deathroot, this is kind of fine as the translation goes. It says, on the night of the dire plot, the stolen rune of death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the rune of death spread across the lands between through the underground roots of the Great Tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. So this on its own makes it sound like the Great Tree could be a completely different thing. And I thought that for a while at first until I looked at all of the rest of the context, because it doesn't exactly sound like the Erdtree, which is, I don't really begrudge the translators for this kind of ambiguity. And as far as like the Tree and Beast Surcoat goes, they might have run into character limitations. Maybe they couldn't completely call it the Great Tree and Beast Surcoat. And maybe they didn't want to call it that because Great Tree and Beast Surcoat is, it just does not roll off the tongue very well. And anyway, so if a death spread through the lands between through the roots of the Great Tree, what does that mean? We might get a little bit more context with the Prince of Death's pustule. It is said that this pustule came from the visage of the Prince of Death, he who used to be called Godwin. As first dead of the demigods, it's said he's buried deep under the capital at the Erdtree's roots. So here's kind of where we get a bit of potentially conflicting information. Was Godwin buried at the roots of the Erdtree or the Great Tree? We do have the possibility that the Erdtree could have usurped or assimilated the roots of the Great Tree if that thing did exist. But like I mentioned a moment ago, as far as this description is concerned, they should kind of be treated synonymously. So, Erdtree roots equals Great Tree roots, question mark? And then here's kind of like where the biggest issues come up in trying to understand it if you look at only these descriptions in a vacuum. So, root resin. The roots of the Great Tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around Great Tree roots. So as far as the translation goes, this is actually pretty spot on. The only kind of difference that might be worth talking about is Great Tree roots being capitalized implies it's kind of a different organism in English, but the Japanese doesn't necessarily have that level of emphasis, and it could just be saying Great Tree roots rather than Great Tree roots, or like giant tree roots, big tree roots. But I don't exactly know how I feel about that. I don't really think that works, because in previous FromSoft games, the cone character, like this one right here for root, just was kind of used for roots on its own rather than Jukone, which would mean tree roots. So I tend to believe that this should be taken as Great Tree space roots rather than Great space tree roots. So hopefully that makes sense. So this makes them sound distinct. However, the way that I cope with this description would be that the golden tree here is a reference to the Erdtree, but technically there isn't just one Erdtree, and this could be talking about Erdtrees plural and might include the minor Erdtrees. And so you might be able to cope by saying the roots of the Great Tree, as in the big one in Leyndell, were once linked to those of the Erdtrees, like the minor ones. So in my mind, I think the Erdtree is kind of like Pando, if anybody is familiar with that in like real life. I almost said mythology. No, it's a real tree. So it's one tree specimen organism or whatnot, and it's cloned itself like hundreds, if not thousands of times through its roots. And so there's kind of clones of one tree, but it looks like multiple distinct ones. So I think that might be what's going on with the Erdtree, and why we have a reference to the specific Great Tree, which D kind of calls the Erdtree in English and whatnot. And then the deep root depths map is kind of similar. Here too begins the network of Great Tree roots that spread throughout the lands between. I think it's talking about the big Leyndell Great Tree, which is much greater in size than all of the other Erdtrees. So, all right, I'm kind of done with that tangent. I'm going to check out chat and maybe tie it back together with the other stuff with like the Crucible, but it might not be strictly necessary here. So, all right. And thank you all for letting me know when I was live. I appreciate that. Yeah, it wasn't even any of our internet. It's just OBS. Mao sees Godfrey connections to the Crucible, like the Erdtree in its infancy was still chaotic, like the Crucible and the nature of its power. And yeah, I think there's a lot of other parallels that we can make with Godfrey in the Crucible that I'm going to potentially leave alone for now, unless I need to substantiate it a bit more. But I hate to say it, just like for now, take me at my word that there's nothing quite explicitly that places the Crucible before Godfrey in the timeline as far as the Japanese text is concerned, because the term used for primordial doesn't necessarily mean primordial as in like at the beginning of time. It just means like the first or the beginning of something. So it could be the original Erdtree or the first Erdtree, the beginning Erdtree, etc. All right, let me catch up. Oddspace asks, so the Great Tree came first? Not as far as like before the Erdtree, no. I would say the Great Tree is the Erdtree, and so it doesn't exactly come first. David has seen theories that suggest the Erdtree is just the golden, slightly translucent shell or the husk outside the very dead Great Tree. I am familiar with those theories as well. I don't really want to touch on them because I don't think they're entirely relevant to the point that I'm trying to make right now. And I just don't really think it leads anywhere. I'm of the opinion that the outer shell is not like truly illusory. I would say it's more metaphysical. What's the word in Japanese? I use this word all the time, and I'm just drawing a blank. I'm just going to leave it be. Pando is awesome. Galamoth is almost positive it's just saying root resin is found near big tree roots. So, big tree roots versus great tree roots, I think we could agree to some extent that if Deathroot was brought in through Erdtree burial of Godwyn, then the fact that those who live in death are kind of all where root resin pops up as well would lead into a good case that those would have been Erdtree roots as well. Galamoth says the Erdtree roots used to be connected to the catacombs, but now they are disconnected. Yes, so I think that disconnection would have happened with the shattering, and it may have been done to prevent Deathroot from trying to reintegrate itself or infiltrate the actual big Erdtree that Marika is controlling herself. Hey Diemo, welcome on in. Do they call it Great Runes in Japanese? I think so. Let me check. I'm not sure how relevant that is. Yeah, it's just Dairun, which means Great Rune. And then Eladelia said, Pando is an aspen tree, and aspen is a species of tree, while Pando refers to a specific super tree, which happens to be an aspen. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at the Erdtree situation in terms of the Great Tree. So you might be able to say Great Tree equals Pando, and then Erdtree equals aspen, if we want to make a one-to-one comparison. I don't know how fair that is, but I think in terms of like this illustration, it might be fine. Gorzela, welcome on into the stream. We think of the Erdtree and Great Tree as trees, but what if they're mushrooms, or rather different surface parts of one mycelium, so technically one organism? I don't really have strong feelings on the mycelium thing. I'm kind of against it, I suppose, but I don't, like, even if it is a mushroom, I don't really think that changes too much of our perspective about it. Hey, Jan, nice to see you again. Incorporeal, yeah, that's the way that I always call the Erdtree, but I think even incorporeal might not be the best terminology for it, because the quote-unquote illusory trees where we find the golden seeds from, if you try to smack them with your weapon, it'll bounce off of them. You have like physical collision, which might be like a bit of a dev goof, who really knows, but I always say that the Erdtree shell is physical, because where the hell does all that ash come from for Ashen Lanedell when you burn the so-called outer husk of the Erdtree then? Yushin asks, did no one ever check Godwyn's corpse? I think they did, which is why like that huge ass spike of Deathroot is coming out of it. Oddspace says, so the Great Tree is the main Erdtree. Yes, that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. Galamoth asks, is Marika in control of the tree, or is Radagon? You guess that doesn't have an answer, but his thorns are described as a manifestation of the Erdtree. Yeah, the Japanese is kind of weird for it. Maybe the English is too. It says like it's the husk of its ego, its personality, which is really weird. It spurns all that is without. I should like double check it sometime. But yeah, I don't know if Marika is still there anymore, to be honest, guys. I think it's kind of Radagon, but he's kind of like chilling because he doesn't necessarily want to get punished by the Elden Beast. So he's just kind of like letting Marika hang while he vibes, I guess. It's really strange, but certainly we are told that the thorns do come from his power specifically. I disagree with that, Mao, because we do have the First Church of Marika spoken echoes, which tells Godfrey that guidance has delivered them to where they are. So I guess maybe that could imply that she is a god, or that the Erdtree still existed. But she also tells him to brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree, which is a really vexing line, because saying that they had guidance kind of implies that perhaps she was a god and that the Erdtree was there, because we're told, at least in God content, that grace was brought with the Erdtree to the lands between. Not the Golden Order, that's like a translation thing. But if he's brandishing the Elden Ring for the age to start, does that mean Marika already had it? Is her age kind of like begun, but not fully until Godfrey kills everybody? I suppose it's really arguable. Yeah, actually, David brings up a really good point in that the Erdtree might be as corporeal as Godfrey, who definitely hits us hard. Good point there. And Colovian Hoster, welcome on into the stream. Jan asks, are we told that the thorns come from Radagon? I believe so. I don't remember exactly where the line would be, but nonetheless, it does have Radagon's like lattice pattern on the thorns themselves. So yeah, whether or not you want to say the Erdtree itself in the outer shell is kind of like a remembrance, like Gracela is saying, at the very least, it's not illusory in the sense that it doesn't exist, is kind of what I want to impress upon people. And then Deacon Freeman, welcome on in. Sweet. Thank you. And then Nemo, nice to see you again. And then Nemo says they think that the Erdtree was around before the age of the Erdtree / Golden Order. They had to have had a tree before they could center their empire around it. It is a little bit weird. I kind of think that would be the most likely conclusion, but with protection of the Erdtree, we're told that the Erdtree didn't necessarily embody order until all of this conquest was done. So it's probably like a little bit of column A and column B, that there might have been an Erdtree, but it would be quite diminished in comparison to the Erdtree as we know it now. And we don't know if it got burned by giants or anything like that, if they could have retaliated. We have this huge unanswered question about the first cardinal sin, which kind of implies that the Erdtree would have been burned at some point, but we don't know when that was. We do have Ash and Leyndell, but it also doesn't really make a ton of sense when it got burned. But anyway. Diggin, what are we chatting about? So I just gave a quick rundown of how the ancient Erdtree is the Crucible. The Crucible isn't necessarily a thing which predates the Erdtree as far as the Japanese is concerned, and that the Crucible Erdtree is specifically Godfrey's Erdtree, and that the Erdtree was changed in its nature by Radagon with his ascent to Elden Lord. So that takes a lot of context to really understand, but I promise you, I'm not talking out of my ass, even if you and others respectfully disagree. I think there's certainly room for disagreement, but as far as the Japanese is concerned, there are multiple ways to read it, which is frustrating. You agree mostly? Okay, sweets. All right, so yeah. Now with all of that set up, I don't remember exactly what Quelaag was talking about, other than me just being like, okay, guys, here's going to be the biggest difference between her interpretation of the timeline and mine. And so, right, let's back it up a little bit, double listen to what she was saying, get back on the same track, and proceed.
Even existed. I'm definitely of the mindset that there is like a primordial... There's like a primordial version of the Erdtree, and I think that it changes to the Erdtree at some point in history, and I think that line exists right here.
And I'm perfectly fine with this kind of disagreement, and yeah, so just to kind of catch everyone back up to speed with what I was talking about a moment ago, what I said about the Crucible in the Erdtree, while that might be true, it also doesn't necessarily mean that there couldn't have been another tree that's unrelated to this one in the past, but if there is that kind of tree, we don't actually have any explicit confirmation of it, believe it or not. And so, yeah. Rite tree equals Erdtree also equals Crucible equals FML.
Maybe? I don't know. But I do think that the Crucible era is like incredibly important, and Godfrey's Crucible Knights cast this like sigil, and this is like considered the ancient Erdtree era, but like it's very clear that the anchor rune is active during this era, whereas in this one there is no anchor rune. It's like 4 equidistant circles. So it's very clear that there's like an obvious difference between these two eras. And I think that that has a lot to do with death and death being sealed away, and I think it has a lot to do with the way that death is processed changing. And it's during this era that Godfrey and his rule then create these like big gladiatorial coliseums where people will like get together and they'll fight each other, and the people who die will get put into pots, and then the pots get put at the base of Erdtrees and then later minor Erdtrees. And it almost looks as if they're acting as like fertilizer. It's like mass Erdtree burials kind of on steroids. So that's like this whole era of death being processed, right? That established.
And it's because death is processed in this era, amongst other reasons, that I believe Destined Death would have probably most likely been removed from the Elden Ring around this period, which would have potentially transitioned the age of Erdtree worship into that of what I would call the Golden Order. Although some people prefer to think this is the Golden Order fundamentalism era, I personally don't see a distinction between these two, so just to try to keep my perspective clear for those who may be unfamiliar.
That whole era like was established with Godfrey, but that's like a whole other, once again, that's like a whole other video. I don't want to get like too distracted. Okay, now we've made it to Golden Order fundamentalism. This is when you know, Marika has dumped Godfrey and she gets together with, you know, Radagon, and whether or not that he was like his own man or if he was always an aspect of Marika, that's up for debate, and I'm sure that we're going to get like a big reveal of that in the DLC.
Funny thing is, we were arguing intensely about this in the lore chat earlier today, which, I mean, it's almost a daily occurrence at this point, especially with the DLC looming. So, Deacon asked if you could send me a Reddit thread. Yes, everyone is welcome to send me like whatever links that they want, with the added caveat in that I'm pretty confident YouTube eats these links, so it's easier to either do it as a direct comment to the video section of this channel, or on my Discord server, which is linked to the top of the chat here, or somewhere also in the video description itself, I think. Hey Chadwick, nice to see you again. You think Vike started the war with the giants, or is the inciting character? I would say you crazy, you frenzied. Been eating too many grapes. Christopher thinks Godfrey must have burned the tree with the kindling maiden, and Melina is burned and bodiless when we meet her. Well, that also depends on when one thinks Melina was born. So if you think she's a child of Godfrey or Marika, how does that work? Was she born before the Erdtree existed, or was the Erdtree burned later on? These are kind of like some of the bigger questions that arise in relation to that topic. Was Melina a child of Radagon and Marika, which is a really common thought? So it gets real rough out here, depending on how we try to break up the timeline. Galamoth asks, why would Marika never cleaned the ash up? Wouldn't it make more sense to have been for it to have been from the Shattering War, with all the firebombs being launched at the city? That is a very common thought. One of the issues with that is kind of the location of the ash and the location of the burns in Leyndell itself. So it seems like the lower quarter, colloquially speaking here, is the ashen part of Leyndell, like the burned portion, and the the fortified manor is much more burned than the upper portion of Leyndell, and it has way more ash than almost any other part of Leyndell, except for like the outskirts between the first and second ramparts with the Misbegotten and the Perfumers. So it just doesn't make sense for it to have been like from the Shattering specifically, because if it came from the actual tree itself from the Shattering, one would almost imagine that there'd be more ash near the epicenter of the tree rather than kind of slightly further away. Like upper Leyndell is relatively more clean than lower Leyndell, although you might be able to attribute that to nobles taking more care of it. But even if they did take more care of it, they did a pretty shit job. There's still a lot of ash everywhere. And then Alice says, you don't think Vike started the war with the giants because he's a Tarnished, and the Tarnished were just soldiers of Godfrey prior to the separation of Godfrey and Marika separated with Godfrey after his last foe was vanquished. To give a counterpoint and play devil's advocate here, even though Vike is Tarnished now, that doesn't necessarily disclude his prior history to Godfrey and what may have come before, to be fair. It sucks, but yeah. Nemesis says, you don't know, somehow you believe Melina was born before Marika became a god. That's fine if you believe that. I just want to bring up these points so that way, if you do feel a certain kind of way, I don't want you getting tripped up by having potentially conflicting beliefs by thinking Melina is actually Radagon's kid and Marika's, and kind of after the Carian children, or like amongst the Carian children, and that kind of contradicting the idea that Melina would have burned a tree prior to like create the Erdtree or something like that. All right, let's go back to the video.
But when her and Radagon have children, they are considered to be born from one god. Not born from a lord and a god, not born from two different gods, born from one god. And these kids often have curses associated with them. And if you read Miquella's like lore and Malenia's lore, it says Miquella and Malenia are both children of a single god. As such, they are both Empyreans, but suffered afflictions from birth. One was cursed with eternal childhood, where the other harbored rot within. And I feel like I'm gonna knock out Malenia's butterfly because I feel like it's the most obvious and the easiest for me to like break down. Malenia's butterfly not only resembles Malenia in like color palette and concept, but it's actually referenced in the butterfly item description that it is associated with the goddess of rot herself, and that it's also referring to Aeonia, which is the name that refers to Scarlet Aeonia, which is Malenia's massive bloom she released during her battle with Radon. In addition to all of this, all of the items that you can create with this butterfly item are all rot related, so like it's very obvious that this is about her. There's like no debate as to like who this is referencing. This is Malenia, right? But then we have the nascent butterfly, and the nascent butterfly is like super interesting because Miquella's lore is all over the place. So, very simple visual reference is that the nascent butterfly is like in reference to Miquella's eternal youth, but also Miquella's cocoon. The description says an arcane butterfly with translucent wings, material used for crafting items. Exceedingly rare to find, this butterfly appears as if it's emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. As if it's just emerged from its cocoon for its entire life. Sorry. So it's kind of saying it's like a premature, like eternal youth butterfly. It's like translucent, its wings aren't fully developed yet, is kind of what it's trying to get at. And then also this like arcane magic is very important. A lot of the bubble magic and a lot of the Babylonian inspired magic is intelligence arcane or just intelligence. So it's kind of like associated with those practices. But it's really, really cool because Miquella's butterfly's wings can create the dappled cure meat or the dappled white cure meat, which is very similar to, in like function and in visual design, the ancestral following horns, which help with like our immunity stat, our robust.
I'm trying to remember if it was Quelaag that pointed this out. Maybe it was Hawkshaw's color. Yeah, I think it might have been Hawkshaw's color theory that like mentioned this stuff, which kind of opened my eyes to like these items existing, because I really don't use a lot of consumables in my gameplay. But anyway, Alice, or no, it wasn't Alice. I meant to type in Anne. Or no, I'm fine. All right, so Anne, Deadma, welcome back to the stream. They had a really interesting question, and it kind of got brought up again by Colovian Hastur, in that what is something that a lot of people attribute to being lore significant, but I actually think it's highly misinterpreted, or just nothing to look into, more like a coincidence or something. So I couldn't think of something off the top of my head, although I know there's like a number of them, either due to like translation differences or interpretation differences, because the English might be a bit more ambiguous. But Colovian had said, the Stormlord is the bird whose ashes you find in the Chapel of Anticipation, the one that you can give to Nefeli. So that's called like the Storm Hawk King, and as far as the translation goes, this is really unfortunate. Let me pull it up for you guys. Wait, I might have something really prepared. Alright, maybe not. So I did do like a short on it a long time ago. And apparently I don't really have like a direct one-to-one type thing which I can point to right now, unfortunately. So as far as the English goes, it said, the Stormhawk King, ashes of a hawk revered by all others as sovereign, back in the days when Stormvale's winds still raged like no other. This is a truly tragic translation choice here because the Japanese is much more clear about who regarded the Stormhawk King as sovereign. So, in the time when the true storm existed in Stormvale, these are the ashes of a hawk that was recognized as the Lord of the Hawks, essentially. Sorry, that's kind of a little bit redundant here. Yeah. So anyway, the Stormhawk King isn't regarded by all others as being sovereign. It's explicitly the sovereign of all of the hawks, right there. So that's kind of like one of those things, which is unfortunate. So I tend to not think of it as a big deal, but it's definitely tripped up a lot of people. So I don't blame them for thinking that one would have been the Storm King or Stormlord, because it kind of makes sense based off that English translation, but not so much in the Japanese, unfortunately. And you're welcome. All right, I'm gonna go back to the video. Hey, Ponyboy.
A stat or focus stat. So it is like this idea of like a cure or like older medicine that like helps us increase our like robustness and like our immunities. And it's really cool because like Miquella's whole story is about finding a cure for their siblings. And I want to talk about that. And I think that it's like such a beautiful story, but it also made me wonder about Tim Diggity's video, because we were talking about whether or not Tim Diggity is Melina, whether or not Miquella is Melina, or Miquella is the Gloam-eyed queen, or Melina is the Gloam-eyed queen, or who's Saint Trina. Like, I want to break this down a little bit because I think it's really important, but hold on to this ancestral follower relation because it is important to this. So we're going to get into Miquella's history. So Miquella is the child of Radagon and Marika, and Miquella was born during this era of the Erdtree. I want to make it very clear, the Gloam-eyed queen is over here. She's back over here. She's old. She's older. And another thing too that I...
And believe it or not, this is a contentious topic as well. I'm of the opinion that the Rune of Death was removed later, around this time, so I think the Gloam-eyed queen, despite everything, could still exist around here. I know that we have like a lot of issues between trying to reconcile the relationship between Marika and the Gloam-eyed queen, but I kind of honestly try to leave that alone because there's enough issues of identity with both Marika and the Gloam-eyed queen where you can try to make a legitimate claim that one is the other or anything like that. We also have some ambiguity as to the children of Marika that we don't know about, Empyreans, and whether Empyreans are specifically meant to succeed Marika, or if, you know, there were like pre-American Empyreans, because Marika is technically an Empyrean according to like the implication of Malekith's set or his remembrance, something like that. So it's really annoying, and my goal isn't to necessarily make a definitive claim about the Gloam-eyed queen as much as it is try to understand when the Rune of Death is removed first and then just kind of work backward from that conclusion, because I think we can learn more about the Rune of Death than the Gloam-eyed queen specifically. So I just kind of treat this as a wash, and we might get more info about this in the DLC, and I am fine if I get proven wrong and I need to rethink my opinions later on. Wouldn't surprise me, but yeah, anyway. So that's just another bit of a difference that I feel with Quelaag here. But I would agree that Miquella would definitely be born around this time. I just placed death like here. And C wonders if many of these confusing aspects of the story and the characters are meant to be red herrings or just meant to be vague, because that's the nature of lore. And that is always kind of the quintessential question. And so I think the best thing that we could do is just try to find as much evidence from the text and the visuals and whatnot to support whatever theories we come up with, and be willing to change and recognize new evidence to either support or refute our claims. Pigsy says, you don't get every character has to be another character. Can't the Gloam-eyed Queen be the Gloam-eyed Queen? Yes. And so that's why I was mentioning multiple possibilities that the Gloam-eyed Queen could just be another Empyrean candidate meant to succeed Marika. But the reason why I mention the identity of Marika in that specifically is because the nature of the Gloam-eyed Queen is intrinsically linked to the Rune of Death more specifically, and because it has to deal with the Rune of Death and the Rune of Death's inclusion into the Elden Ring itself, you run into the issue of who actually controls the ring when the Rune of Death is removed. And this is a problem whether or not it's Marika, the Gloam-eyed Queen, or another god, which could have been like Placidusax's fled god. This is a kind of big issue, which is why this topic comes up ad nauseum, unfortunately. All right.
I want to point out, the Gloam-eyed Queen and Queen Marika's runes are twin runes. They're like the same, but they're inverted, right? So we have the Rune of Dust and Death, and we have the Rune of Abundance, or what I like to call like the Rune of Life, or like birth. It's like flowing life, newborn life. So we have like this cycle of life and death that mirror each other. I definitely think that the Gloam-eyed Queen was Queen Marika's twin because of this, but she could be related to Queen Marika in another way that we don't know. Or like I said before, there is also like a popular theory that the Gloam-eyed Queen is an aspect of Queen Marika's self, and that she was both life and death, but she chose to seal away a part of herself. I personally like to see the Gloam-eyed Queen as like a completely separate entity, although I would be open to Marika being both and sealing away that part of her. I'm like open to anything at this point, but I do.
Yeah, I'm glad she kind of brought that up herself since I didn't have to. So to build off of that point and like the whole opposites and sealing things away, I'm going to turn to Google Images, but I'm struggling to find the picture that I want. Okay, this will be perfect. I bring this up quite often in comparison of the whole life and death situation going on. So this is taken from Norse. Anyway, it's taken from some mythology. These are like actual runes. I guess it's not mythology at that point anymore. So Algi's represents the life, beginning, and protection, which I think is comparable, but definitely not the same as Marika's Sorceal rune or her Elden rune as it's described in the description for this item. And then Ear doesn't actually really match up with death, but my point is, in this kind of language, the literal inversion of life equals death. So kind of working based off of what Quelaag said there, you can kind of make that comparison potentially with these two symbols, although it isn't quite one-to-one because it's only really the orientation of the rune which changes. And you might be able to reconcile that, and I guess I'll pull up my own icons here, with the idea of the runes potentially stacking on top of each other. I don't know if I have a good Destined Death cutout, so maybe I'll just use... Okay. Okay, I'll do it this way. I think if you had like this at the bottom of like the Rune of Death, you might get like a full rune fragment, kind of analogous to the Great Slayer Greatsword. And I brought this up, I feel like, a lot of times in the past few streams. Did I just say Great Rune Greatsword? I think I might have. I meant Golden Order Greatsword. So kind of something like this. I think if you were to stack both of these runes on top of each other. Now, why am I going through all of this point of like, oh man, we've got this inversion stuff? I'm doing like my own Pepe Sylvia. I didn't really think much of this for a while, but then I couldn't help but notice something in the Elden Beast's attack when it uses sacred waves of gold, whatever it's called. So whenever we cast Litany of Proper Death... hold on. I know I have a picture of it. If not, I have footage. Okay. So Sacred Relic Blade, when it does its kind of symbol of the order, it's actually inverted from what you see when you cast Litany of Proper Death, which is oriented away from the caster. so I was like, wait a second, this is inverted. I don't know how relevant that is, but that kind of opened my eyes to the potential of order's representation being inverted, and that might tie into like life and death. Although if that is the case, I don't know like what exactly the difference would be between like one half of litany order being inverted and the other, because it does seem to ultimately be the kind of same power source and whatnot there. So that's just kind of like one tangent that I wanted to go on with the reference to life and death specifically as potential aspects of America. Whether or not that's true might not be too important, but I think it's just a neat concept nonetheless there. Pyrus, welcome back to the stream. You're wondering if I think there might be a connection between the vertical bars of light in the Great Runes and lineages. Moog and Morgoth, Radon and Rykard, Miquella and Malenia share positions. So I think as far as Miquella and Malenia's runes go now, I think it might have worked better if Miquella's rune was the rune of the unborn, because that one seems more analogous to Malenia's great rune, and I guess I could like pull them up if I have them labeled. Okay, so Malenia's great rune is like this. I guess the great rune of the unborn is kind of oriented the same way, so it wouldn't be like Malenia's. Okay, so I'll pull up Rykard and Radon's here. So wait, no, they do match up too. So maybe that is right, that Miquella's and Malenia's would be mirrored this way rather than like literally mirrored and flipped around. But now with the story trailers kind of showing a new great rune, I think that one might be Miquella's, and it doesn't quite match up Malenia's, because even like setting aside the orientations, it's not completely circular, and there's like a new horizontal bar in the pillar, I guess, if you want to call it that. So I'm not entirely sure what to make of that yet. It could be a completely different great rune that we just have no knowledge of. So I'm kind of open for change. And then Galamoth asks a really good question in that, is it possible the Gloam Queen was just channeling the power of Destined Death rather than being in control of it? I think that might be a possibility. I meant to double check the kind of weird ass epiphany that I might have stumbled upon last night at the end of stream about whether or not the Rune of Death actually is the source of power of Black Flame. Because I was like, oh no, it's fine. The power of Black Flame was lost. But looking back at the items, I was like, wait a second. It doesn't actually say that the Black Flame's power was lost because of the Rune of Death. It just said it was lost because the queen was defeated, essentially. So let me pull that up. So this is going to be a bit of a big tangent, guys. So give me a moment here. What spell was it? Was it Ritual? No, it's not this one. So Scouring Black Flame was the big issue, but what was the other one which confirmed it? Damn it. Wait. So it's the Godskin set? Okay, so I was right. Black Flame. Was it Scouring Black Flame? Okay, no. I was right. For some reason, I thought I was talking about the sealing of the queen here. So, okay, no, I'm fine. Take back what I said. I should have looked into it earlier in the day. No, we're good. So yeah, sealing the Rune of Death did make the power of Black Flame go away, although that isn't technically explicit in the Godskin Noble set or Apostle set, which I was like, wait a second, what? Because I forgot it's brought up in two different contexts here. So As to whether or not the Gloam-eyed Queen actually controlled destined death, I think that is a good question we don't have a specific answer for, but if she didn't and like Black Flame was truly a godskin thing, then it could help explain why Malekith and Marika were able to trump the godskins if they had the Rune of Death in the Elden Ring and Marika controlled it, I suppose. But I don't know, man. David said, it's possible that the golden strands in the story trailer are the runes of life and death, and then it was separated by Marika, and the rune of death looks all mangled and gross after it's been hidden away. So that was something I kind of wanted to touch on, but I kind of got lost in the sauce talking about the differences between like the Erdtree, the Great Tree, the Rune of Death, and all that. So in the story trailer, I did wonder if that was literally like the actual birthing moment of the Erdtree, and whether or not that meant it was plucking out the Rune of Death. But when we look at what Marika pulls out of the like womb looking like thing, it doesn't necessarily resemble the actual Rune of Death, which we see here, which kind of makes me wonder about it. So I do think that there's still a strong possibility that the Rune of Death was in the Elden Ring even later, although Marika might have continued to do stuff that just wasn't shown on screen. So it's still kind of technically ambiguous there. And so whatever's going on with those bodies might be Crucible related, but I don't know if that's actually supposed to be the Crucible, if that makes sense. Pyrus asks, if the Gloam-eyed Queen could give birth, does that mean she's somewhat related to life? So I think life and death are a duality in Elden Ring, and this is pretty confirmed in my opinion in certain descriptions like Poison Mist, Poison Armament, and the Remembrance of the Regal Ancestor. So while it is kind of talking about rot, I think the second sentence here is definitely meant to stand on its own as far as the implications go. Maybe it is technically just for the rats. Anyway, I'll roll with it for now, because I think the regal ancestral spirit kind of confirms it one way or the other. Those who dwell within poison know rot all too well. The death that begets life, that comes to all equally. That is to say, it is the cycle of rebirth put into practice. So all life kind of comes from death, and it's a cycle. It's samsara, it's rinne. This is like a really big FromSoft thing. And then for the ancestral, nope, not that one. Remembrance of the regal ancestor, it says, ancestral spirits exist as a phenomenon beyond the purview of the Erdtree. Life sprouts from death as it does from birth. Such is the way of the living. And then we're told in the other descriptions, I think Blessing of the Erdtree and Erdtree Heal, or maybe it was the other Erdtree incantation, that the Erdtree is essentially like all life before, because it's like fleeting. So I think this all ties together, that there is a cycle, and that you can't truly separate life from death because they're dual in nature. So the Gloam-eyed Queen giving birth doesn't really seem to me that it would imply that she's like kind of anti-death, and I think the two should be taken together. But that's actually a really good point to bring up, the fact that she is a mother, so she can't just be like all death and gloom and gloam, I guess. Clovian says, if the Rune of Death is in the Elden Ring, meaning it's a fundamental part of the current laws, wouldn't removing it be a good method of removing the Gloam-eyed Queen's advantage? Well, I mean, you could also just use it against the Gloam-eyed Queen. I mean, you could have just taken it and put it in Malekith's blade, and he's the sole proprietor of Destined Death, which could work. But we're also told that it was sealed in his blade essentially after he defeated the Gloam-eyed Queen, which is kind of strange. So because of that kind of causal relationship, that defeating the Gloam-eyed Queen leads to the sealing and removal of the Rune of Death, essentially, that it seems like it's more tied to her power than America's specifically. Hey, Kyle, thanks. I got it. Who are the gods that they hunt? Good question. We don't know. And to be fair, like, even if they aren't the gods that the Godskins hunted aren't like American style gods, we do have like the weird fell god and all that other stuff. Maybe the gods were like the little oracle bubble boys and their kinship or kinfolk, I should say. We just don't know who the Godskins actually hunted other than these unnamed gods, which are kind of humanoid. Kyle thinks the trailer just shows America taking some runes and creating her new Elden Ring. You think the reason it looks different than Fair Missoula's is because she's creating a new one. Malekith might be off screen. Mala asks, maybe it was the rune of life and death and America split it? Yeah, that's kind of the implication, or an implication that I'm trying to make here, that death is kind of part of life, which is why I was trying to mention like maybe they kind of all fit together to make a larger ring shape before, and could have had like pillars going in between them, perhaps. And then C brings up the very philosophical point in that in order to die, you have to live. Yes. Corn asks, is the Gloamide Queen definitely a mother? Well, she does cradle the newborn apostle, so I guess there might be some ambiguity as to whether or not she is the one directly giving birth, but she certainly fits the role of a mother or kind of like wet nurse type figure. Maybe not like literally in the terms of like a wet nurse actually performs, but I don't think it's beyond the purview of her character to be personified as a mother. She didn't steal those babies? That's a good question, actually. Maybe I'm wrong. Hey, Aina, welcome back to the stream. Anticipated finds it impressive how many gingers are in Elden Ring, considering it's a recessive gene. You are a ginger, not that it matters. It does matter, because that'll put you in line with the soulless demigods. All right, Mao, thanks for joining in, and you have a good night, day, or whatever for your time zone. All right, let's go back to the video after all these tangents.
Do you think that given Moog and Morgott having twin runes and being two separate individuals, I'm just kind of going off of that logic that is the Gloamide Queen and Queen Marika being separate individuals with opposite concepts. Malekith also is the one who sealed away the Gloamide Queen, and all of the Gloamide Queen related stuff, the Destined Death stuff, happens to exist on Fair Missoula, right? With the twin Deathbirds and with Malekith Serena being in that room and like all that shit. So I think that this giant floating mausoleum that was kind of like at the center of the primordial Erdtree was the Gloamide Queen's domain. It just makes sense thematically because it's all death related. Okay, moving on from that, let's talk about Miquella again. So Miquella.
So yeah, just speaking to that final point about it all being death related, I would like to point back to Quelaag's own concessions here that there was like the whole Colosseum gladiatorial combat, which kind of relates into death because you are feeding the Erdtree with the remains of the dead. Now, granted, that might not be destined death or the type of death that's used for the Deathbirds. I'm willing to concede that point, but I don't think it is quite so cut and dry with the position of the Gloamide Queen on the timeline. Feels bad, man.
It's all death related. Okay, moving on from that, let's talk about Miquella again. So Miquella was the child of Marika and Radagon, and Miquella had a problem with a couple things. So Miquella was like faithful to Golden Order fundamentalism, which is what Radagon championed. Radagon was all about Golden Order fundamentalism, and Miquella created a gift for his dad, and it was called the Rings of Light. And there's an incantation that you can read. It says, produces 3 rings of light and fires them forward. It was a gift from young Miquella to his father Radagon. And Radagon responded with a grift
I love
with
it.
a gift of gratitude to the young Miquella from his father, Radagon. Produces a golden ring of light and fires it across a wide area. Charges enhance range. And yet, the young Miquella abandoned fundamentalism, for it could do nothing to treat Malenia's accursed rot. This is the beginning of unalloyed gold. So it seems like there was some kind of, I don't know if I'm reading into this too much, but it seems like this exchange may have triggered Miquella to then pursue creating the Erdtree and moving away from fundamentalism. It seems like he was beseeching, like a young Miquella was beseeching Radagon to potentially cure Malenia's rot affliction, and it just seemed like fundamentalism couldn't do anything for her, and so then Miquella chose to choose a different path. And Miquella's path is very interesting because Miquella gets into some ancestral follower stuff, Miquella gets into some Noxtella stuff, Miquella gets into like all different aspects of belief in order to try to like find a cure. And this is like supported by a couple things. It also seems too that like Miquella is concerned over the death of Godwyn the Golden, because Godwyn didn't die a true death. Godwyn's soul was destroyed, but his body physically lives and grows forever. So it seems like Miquella is like concerned about Godwyn's circumstances. It just seems like Miquella is plagued with like the circumstances of his siblings and doesn't know how to like reconcile that within Golden Order fundamentalism.
Truly the trauma of the youngest child. I don't know. I'm kind of joking because like quite often it's the oldest child that is the parent and tries to fix everything, but definitely the youngest has a lot of let's say role models, or maybe not role models, models in which to like try to gain some perspective about the world. And then all of the middle children are forgotten, which is why nobody cares about Ronnie's death and they all focus on Godwyn.
Which makes sense because there's like a lot of other NPCs that also struggle to reconcile this. Goldmask, all of Goldmask's lore regarding Litany of Proper Death and like the Golden Order hunters is super fascinating and plays into all of this. I'm not going to get into that though. I went into that in another video I can link below, but yeah, it just seems like a lot of people are kind of like looking at Golden Order fundamentalism and being like, what the fuck, man? Like, why isn't this, where are all these curses coming from? Why is rot not like creating new life? Like, why is rot stagnating? Why are those who live in death not passing on? Like, what is going on here? And it seems like there's a lot of confusion and a lot of like divergence in philosophy to try to understand what's going on. So anyway, that being said, it seems like Miquella decided to take a different route, and one of the ways that Miquella decided to go was to look at Noxtella. And there's like a couple of lore beats that I think get lost really easily, but one of them is that there's the Castle Sol Knights who guard the walking mausoleums. If you go to Castle Sol and you beat Commander Null and you talk to the ghost that is at the edge of, I don't know if I have a picture of it. I don't. There's a ghost at the end of Castle Sol that attributes Miquella to their whole organization. So he's like lamenting to Miquella because these are like banished knights that don't have fealty to anybody, and it seems like they wanted to swear fealty to the Erdtree. But Miquella said, in order for you to gain access to the Erdtree, you need to fix my comrade. You need to like put the soul or like duplicate the soul of my comrade during the eclipse. And it's a little vague as to like what that means or who the comrade is, but a lot of people theorize that Godwyn is the one who we're referring to, given a lot of the lore regarding Godwyn being like the soulless demigod, and given the lore regarding the Golden Epitaph and like Miquella lamenting about Godwyn, I think.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that that reference in the Erdtree, in Castle Sol is also meant to be a reference to Godwyn. I think the English text is a little bit strange about it. They call it like the soulless bones, which makes it sound more like a skeleton than whatever the hell you see Godwyn. But the Japanese just uses kara, which is like a husk or a shell, essentially, or like a molting, but not exactly. So that I feel like that terminology describes whatever's going on with Godwin a bit better. And we were talking about this on stream yesterday, I believe, in that with the eclipse potentially draining the sun of its color, that might be analogous to the way that the tarnished are drained of gold. And so maybe the idea was eclipsing the sun would be one method of draining whatever latent gold might be left within Godwin's body that could be repurposed for other things. And I think that kind of idea is how we might be able to dupe remembrances with the corpses of soulless demigods. I think it's very likely that since they have no souls, the gold within them essentially becomes shapeless. And then when you take an etching of a champion or whatnot from the Erdtree, like it essentially works as a mold in which you can place the gold, which essentially becomes like a remembrance, which can later be turned into an item or a spell based off of memories that are held within it. So memories get etched into the Erdtree is kind of the big takeaway from that. And Godwin might have his memories or his gold still in his body, which I think, even if we don't want to say it's gold specifically, we could just say like runes perhaps, because he certainly has the rune of death in his body to some degree. So you might be able to substitute runes with memory and whatnot, and then that might be related to destined death becoming a death root, and or how whenever our player character dies, it will drop a like little sapling of gold runes essentially. So hopefully that makes sense. Murder Your Memory. What a perfect name for this time in the stream. Welcome on in. You've never been so hyped for a FromSoft DLC release? Hope it's worth the long ass wait. Don't we all? Not to put too much expectations on us, but historically speaking, the DLCs have been the best parts of the FromSoft games. So hopefully the shoes will be filled, although I think these are really big shoes with the base game of Elden Ring for sure. Emily asks, why do the Alban Orcs have special access to the Housekeeping / Miquella's favor? Do you think Miquella has some connection to Alban Orcs beyond just having compassion for their plight? So that's a really good question. I think that since it's believed the Alban Orcs are born graceless, it could mean that they are without gold. And if Miquella were to give unalloyed gold to Alban Orcs, what would happen to them? Maybe they'll become like pure despite being beings of silver, I guess. I don't really know. But for what it's worth, we actually don't really see Alban Orcs down in the actual Housekeeping area, or LFIL. I know allegedly the cocoons are supposed to be filled with Alban Orcs, but I think from just normal gameplay, it isn't quite obvious how that's supposed to work. Because it isn't obvious that those things are Alban Orcs specifically, so they might not meant to be taken as Alban Orcs, but I am willing to entertain that possibility that they're all cocoonified like Miquella, so there might be something more to it, but so far, Miquella doesn't have a good track record for completing his projects. Like the Housekeeping ended in failure, his cocoon kind of ended in failure because of Moog, unalloyed gold ended in failure. Well, with a caveat of like us like fixing the needle, he doesn't finish the project is the main point. And then we have like this entire new scope of a project in the Shadowlands potentially, and whatever's going on in the Shadowlands might not relate to anything else for Miquella except for like Saint Trina. So I don't know. It seems like our boy has a bad case of the ADHD for being a child. Colovian says, isn't Miquella all about the lesser and the meek? Yes, and part of the reason why I'm just being a little bit guarded with my language with Miquella is because I definitely know there's a lot of altering interpretations of Miquella as to whether or not he is evil, if he's scheming, if he's like taking advantage of people, if he's like a Griffith stand-in, which I think are respectable positions to hold, and we are told some kind of suspect things about Miquella being the most fearsome demigod of all. He wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There's nothing more terrifying. So I am kind of guarded about my opinion on Miquella as well. Miquella is rumored to have Riz. Indeed. There's nothing more terrifying. He is the Rizzler.
I think that is like a good like theory, you know. But the walking mausoleums utilize architecture and technology from Noxtella. And like, it's very clear that like Noxtella probably existed around like here on the timeline. Miquella's born over here. So it's very clear that like Miquella is like getting technology from like an older civilization to do these like weird eclipse dark moon type rituals. Interesting. And then we also see Miquella like divests his flesh and becomes a tree. And this is like explicitly said by Gideon. I know that some people theorized that this isn't Miquella. This is Miquella. And it says, so the Halig tree, now but a husk, I heard speculation that Miquella embedded himself in the Halig tree, but before he could finish, someone cut the tree open and absconded with his infant form. Indeed, it seems those words held weight. How vexing. So Gideon tells us this. And then I made this like...
So about that quote, we actually kind of brought it up in the Discord yesterday, or no, it was the day before yesterday, I think. No, maybe it was yesterday. I can't remember. Anyway, so there's another line that's definitely plagued the fandom for a long time that I was like, okay, I'll give you guys a little bit of a cursed idea to go along with what the hell Gideon's talking about. So, indeed, it seems those words held weight. How vexing that the all-knowing didn't have the full story. Perhaps the Queen's sorrow was justified. Ah, my apologies. Lost myself for a moment there. So, the Queen's sorrow was justified. This is so damn provocative because this could say that if Miquella became a cocoon boy after the shattering, then the queen potentially being America would mean that she was kind of active and had some like knowledge of what the hell was going on post shattering, which is, you know, definitely not how most people perceive what's going on in the lands between in the wake of the shattering. So we have a couple options here. Option number one is Gideon is an idiot, which might not need a ton of justification. Option two could be that he's actually right and there's more to the story that we don't know, which is also a possibility. And then option three, which is probably the most annoying of these options and the one that I'll share here, is that this could be a kind of relic of a reference to cut content. So, all right, prepare yourselves. In the 1.0 version of the game, a lot of item descriptions are revised. It seems like there were either revised story beats or just like placeholder descriptions in places, because Morgott is called Elden Lord, and I think it's pretty clear that he's not really have meant to been an Elden Lord for a very long time, if he ever was. So, with that kind of, you know, disclaimer at hand, when you look at the clean rot set in 1.0, it says, is the helm, armor, etc. of a winged knight, honor bound to Malenia, the Red Queen. So, if at some point in development Malenia was referenced as a queen, could the Queen Sorrow here have been a reference to Malenia? Which I think probably makes a lot more sense to people than it potentially being America after the shattering. But again, cut content could be cut for a reason, and maybe this shouldn't be fully regarded, but nonetheless, I'll offer it to kind of assuage some people's concerns about this line specifically. Dastardly Duo, welcome into the stream. I like the name. Nemo says, you think it's a 60-40 split on Miquella being good or bad, but you personally hope he's good? It'd be refreshing for a change. Plus, America also used some very Griffith-esque imagery in the trailer. Yeah, we were watching a video the other day which said, oh no, we were all wrong. It's really America who's Griffith. Which is, it's fun to see the kind of arguments that people will come up with and then speak into the wee hours of the morn of the cosmos, the higher plane. Eladelia said it would be a huge failing on FromSoft's part to not show us what an actually good demigod might look like. Jan says Queen Sorrow doesn't mean anything. Gideon was trolling. Got him. Gideot? Yeah. Hey, man, nice to see you again. Guy who uses Gideon icon. Gideon could be an idiot. You know, I mean, I could be an idiot. I've definitely called myself that at times. So the difference is with Gideon being proclaimed all-knowing, I'm all doubting. Which I mean, if Gideon is an idiot, I mean, that's kind of why I want this like little disclaimer here, essentially, with my stupid fake VTuber ass thing here, to not take this stuff like super seriously, despite how seriously I actually treat the lore at times. Hey, Chris Jenkins, do I know how many kids are in each family? I'm assuming you mean the families in Elden Ring rather than in the world. So, with all of the soulless demigods in the mausoleums potentially being actively directly related to America and whatnot, and the fact that we're told that there were other Karian princesses beyond Rani, but we're not given a number of either of these things, I am not willing to venture a guess as to how many children were part of each lineage in the family wreath. All right, so let's go back to the video.
Vexing. So Gideon tells us this. And then I made this like visual a long time ago on Twitter, but you can see that this is like Miquella's body. And then there's like, you can kind of, I outlined like where his rib cage is and like where the arm is, but there's also this big lump in like the stomach area that looks like a womb. And there's like a big pelvis bone that this cocoon sits on. So I definitely think that the cocoon and this like pelvis sat at this point in the tree, and I do think that there was like a transference happening. I think that the
so yeah, as far as like the pelvis goes, I think I'd be more on board with it if we could see more of a skeleton to go along with it. I wonder if the pelvis is just something that Moog got.
body that was inside of the cocoon was being absorbed and like slowly turning into the tree, and then Moog like ripped it out. And this is also supported too, in addition to like Gideon's dialogue, by the fact that like if you look at this arm right here, it's kind of like warped and weird. It's really long and kind of like twisty and bizarre, but it resolves and kind of like forms into a hand that is grasping this like rock. And
I actually didn't notice the hand thing, so that's pretty cool.
And at the very base of it, we see Malenia, who is dreaming. She's like in a slumber, and she talks about how she's waiting for him to return. I kind of wonder if during her dream that she was trying to commune with Saint Trina, which is like the feminine aspect of Miquella, which is supported by like the lilies and with Fervor's cookbook and like the lore regarding that. It's not just cut content, by the way. I know there's a lot of people that are like, cut content doesn't count, but like the Fervor's cookbook uses like Miquella lilies and like Miquella items to create Saint Trina stuff, or vice versa. And the Fervor's cookbook is about Saint Trina. It's a whole thing. Don't worry about it. Whatever. So Malenia is like holding hands with this big tree entity, and she's like sleeping. So it's very clear there's like this rebus multi-gendered aspect to Miquella.
Rebus, this time I didn't bring it up, ironically. Add it to the bingo sheet. I really should make like a lore content video bingo sheet. Maybe like figure out if there's like a randomizer for something like that, because that could be a fun yet silly little chat activity. Actually, that'd be a really funny idea. Like if I had my own one, then I just like randomized every day on stream and just like put it somewhere like off to the corner, and I could like pull it out. Like it'd almost be like Pee-wee's Playhouse, like the word of the day, she said Rebus, and then just scream. Although I probably shouldn't do that with the dogs. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed my terrible impression of Pee-wee Herman off the bat. Who had that interesting comment a moment ago? Yeah, it was Pigsy. Pigsy asked, when did Gideon look into America's will? It could have been when he talked to the fingers, not like right before we fight him. That could explain how he knows of her sorrow. That's actually a really good point, but I think even with that, the kind of issue is how America had knowledge of like Miquella being absconded to begin with to kind of have that sorrow. I mean, she is kind of the god of the world. She might have some kind of omniscience, or might be getting messages relayed to her from like the two fingers and or the greater will. We don't exactly know how that relationship works. So nonetheless, you still might have a point there, I guess. And then Orana, welcome back to the stream. What if the Queen Gideon? Wait, what? Gideon is referring to as Renala, and it has something to do with the Albanorex and her being able to create children. That's a good question. I don't know if Renala should be considered like having grief over Miquella specifically, because we have other items descriptions which say that she was brokenhearted and her heart went with Radagon when he left her. So that doesn't mean she couldn't become even more filled with grief, but that just doesn't quite ring true to me right now. And with that being said, I do know like in the earlier builds of the game with like 1.0, there was more of a connection between Miquella and the Carian family, which would support your point, but they seem to have walked away from that position, which leaves me a little bit more doubtful. So take that as you will. Hey Ezekiel, welcome into the stream again. Really snuck the Rebus in there like that with no alchemy talk ahead of time? Yep, that's how it be. Gak equals the free space? Maybe. I mean, for me, it'd be like Japanese references almost, but yeah. All right, Pixie thinks Marika is still partially active. She can remove and give grace still. Maybe she can learn things through the fingers in the round table, or she is brand style in the tree. Oh, like Song of Ice and Fire brand. Okay. For some reason, I didn't like interpret the capitalization. I'm like, what kind of brand is he talking about? Anyway. Yes, I'm very familiar with cuckoos, Chris. Let's go back to the video.
It looks like there was the transference of energy kind of emulates like a pregnancy in some ways with the way that, the cocoon would have sat, I feel. And then I think also too with like the medieval imagery of like the rebus and, am I saying that right? I feel like I'm saying it too close to like Reba or something. I don't know.
I always think of Rebus Philbin. I don't know.
But yeah, I feel that like Miquella is like engaging in this like ritual where they're feeding their sacramental blood to this tree to grow a tree. And I think that this is where we get a little bit of tie-in addition to like the immunity ancestral follower shit. I think that we're getting a little bit of tie-in to this idea of like an ancient civilization that liked to grow trees. And I think that the Erdtree may have been grown by a previous entity that predated Queen Marika, and I think it was this guy. I'm pretty sure it was this guy. This is the man that the primordial Erdtree may have grown from, or may be involved with, I don't know. Or he just knew some kind of like shit about growing trees that I think is like incredibly important to a lot of like groups that are trying to grow their own civilizations or grow their own trees. But I think that Miquella is one of them, and I definitely think that a lot of those social practices and the stuff that Miquella is drawing from predate fundamentalist era stuff. So Miquella is like pulling all these ancient things from like death rituals and like the Gloam Queen and Noxtella and all this other stuff. So does that mean...
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point. Like, where would he have gotten the inspiration to look at the eclipse to begin with? I guess I never considered that angle of things.
I think that Miquella is the Gloam Queen. There's like a couple of damning things.
Wait. For real? Hold on. I was not ready for that. That was even more abrupt than the Rebus.
All this other stuff. So does that mean... I think that Miquella is the Gloam Queen.
Okay, it was prefaced as a question. Okay, that was my fault.
There's like a couple of damning things. It definitely seems like Miquella came in possession of some of the Gloam Queen stuff, like the Spirit Calling Bell might be associated with her, or might be associated with the Snowy Crone and Spirit Calling and like the Royal Revenants. There's a lot of overlap there. It's very interesting that Melina at the beginning of our journey gives us Torrent, when Torrent was Miquella's. So there's some like overlap with maybe how did Melina know Miquella is Melina, Miquella is Miquella the Gloam Queen. Like, what is going on. Like I said before, Manus in Dark Souls 1 was like, so say if the Gloam-eyed Queen was fragmented, there could be a story beat opportunity for her to be fragmented into like multiple different kids. She could be fragmented into Melina, Miquella, Malenia. Maybe like these are all aspects of her. Maybe rot and decay, but then also death, and then also sleep are all different parts of death. Or maybe they're like loosely associated. Maybe these are all separate outer gods that are associated with death. I'm like totally open to that, but I don't know, I just feel like saying that so many of the characters in the game are each other. I don't know. Maybe it can lend itself to it being kind of like interesting about like internal conflict or something, but
so despite my disdain for like a lot of these types of theories, I actually don't dislike this as a thought experiment. I think there's kind of weight to it. At first, like, if somebody were to say that Miquella is the Gloam-eyed Queen offhandedly and just leave it at that, I would say that doesn't really make any sense because the Rune of Death had to have definitively been removed before Miquella was even born, because he was definitely born in this kind of post-fundamentalism era. But setting that aside, if you do try to take that Manus-style shard of the original being kind of reborn in a new form, I could kind of see what she's getting at there. But as far as the Gloam-eyed Queen being potentially fragmented into the other children, well, I like that idea. I don't really think that bears fruit because we kind of have the somewhat conflicting Scarlet Rot, presumably predating all of the things of the Erdtree and potentially existing in the ancient era, and maybe even predating some of this ancient era stuff like the Deathbirds, depending on how one feels about like the Mushroom Lords and whatnot. So whether that got repurposed into Malenia now, I don't think that's quite as compatible with the Gloam-eyed Queen stuff. And while this doesn't necessarily disprove the theory, I would like a lot more support to explain the connections between Miquella and the Gloam-eyed Queen in a way that is more analogous to the way the Children of the Dark are from Manus. Because while I'm actually not a big fan of how they implemented that into Dark Souls 2 to begin with, I can roll with the punches, and I don't quite get nearly the same vibes of Miquella being a specific shard of the Gloam-eyed Queen's personality, quite the same way that Nashandra was Manus's want or yearning, or Alsana was his fear, or Nadalia was his loneliness, etc. So that's kind of where I am at for now. And hey, Revenant, nice to see you again. We need an edit of that Buzz Lightyear meme with all the Elden Ring characters pointing at each other and saying, "No, I am the Gloam-eyed Queen." I mean, that's like the Spartacus stuff. But yeah, this kind of been a running joke at this point in the server, or the chat. Emily says, you wouldn't think Gurm would be familiar enough with DS2 lore to reference it like that. I mean, that also ties into like one of the questions of how much of Elden Ring is Miyazaki and the FromSoft team versus how much is Gurm. But I think that's kind of an interesting point nonetheless. Orna had a cursed thought when listening to yesterday's stream. Childbirth is grafting, but backwards. I love it. I love it. Cursed thoughts can be amongst the best. Grafting, but backwards. That's legitimately hilarious to me. I'm gonna like play with that idea a bit more, maybe. So, do I want to bring this up now? All right, yeah, I'll bring it up now. I think I've mentioned this on stream sometime in the past 2 weeks or something like that. That I have wondered legitimately whether or not the Great Runes were part of the Elden Ring and like literally part of Marika herself, that she took out and gave birth to the demigods and or her split personalities with. But I don't really think that works for a number of reasons, which I kind of forget off the top of my head right now. I'd probably need to look back at my train of thought when I unleashed that preliminary curse thought on the Discord, but it doesn't work out. I'm pretty confident. So that isn't necessarily like contradicting the idea of like grafting equals the person but backwards. or birth equals grafting, but backwards. But, you know, it is kind of like something I have legitimately considered unironically. Hey, Vord, nice to see you again. You feel like I'm assuming you're saying Gloamide Queen's character is no more fleshed out than any of the other outer gods, or GOC might be something completely different. All right, let's go back in. In the video where C.S. Lewis was talked about, did it go into the Paralandra phase? I don't believe so. If so, it was not directly referenced. All right, here we go.
At the same time, it kind of seems like it is getting a little bit tangled and messy with a lot of the speculation. But that could just be me. I don't know. Whatever. Let's talk about Melina, because I feel like that is going to kind of tie up all the loose ends that I think some people might have. So, and this is like...
Yeah, not going to lie, I did not expect to have like this much substance to go into the video about butterflies before really getting to the butterflies.
Like one of the bigger things that I've noticed in my community, or people that are newer to my channel that come into the streams, and when I kind of loosely say Melina is the Gloamide Queen, people don't know what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna break this down really quick, because I don't think a lot of people have actually seen the Frenzied Flame ending or anything like that, but at the very end of the Frenzied Flame ending, we destroy the Erdtree and it like breaks the cycle, right? We don't iterate on the cycle, it's fully over and done. And after we do that, Melina is able to like open up her eye and she says, I'm gonna deliver you what is yours, destined death. And that ties into the concept of destined death, which was what the Gloamide Queen ruled over. She was like in charge of destroying the gods, she was in charge of death indiscriminate, and Melina has a lot of dialogue about that, and the dialogue around her birth is also quite weird, and I'm going to talk about that too. So let's break down some of her dialogue. So she says first that she is searching for her purpose given to her by her mother inside the Erdtree long ago, for the reason that she yet lives burned and bodiless. So like, one, how could you be living burned and bodiless? Why does she have amnesia about that? Like, what is going on about that? It's also bizarre too that like her movement is stagnated. Like she's only able to go to certain areas, and we have to take her to the Erdtree. So that's like an important plot point. There's also a weird...
Wait a second, she has her own bingo card. What the hell?
...room in the Forbidden Lands that looks like it was originally like a room where she was kept. Do I have a picture of that? Maybe I don't. But there's a room... Oh yeah, I do. There's a room on the elevator. If you go up towards the Forbidden Lands, there's like a jump off point, and it's like a secret room. And this room has a door that has bars and like a jail cell.
So chat, I often take this kind of information for granted because I just kind of assume that most people will know about it. But with her pointing this out, I think that might be like a good thing to do. How would you guys feel if I like went into more excruciating detail about stuff like this in particular? Which I mean, I might forget about because I just tend to forget like what is well known about the game. But yeah, this has just kind of got me thinking here.
Happening. And then there's a royal official who is sitting in a chair outside of this room, and this is where you actually get Melina's Blade of Calling. So there's a weird prison that is in this elevator, and a lot of people didn't realize that it's like a jail cell. But yeah, there's bars on the door, and there's an official that's watching it, that's sitting outside of it. So that's weird. Another thing that's weird regarding her birth, or regarding like her origin and where she was kept, is that she seems to have a really confused idea about what motherhood is about. She doesn't really understand the circumstances of her birth, but she also doesn't understand what being born of a mother means. When you tell Bach that he's beautiful, he starts crying, and she says, I think Bach misses his mother. Does being born of a mother mean one behaves in such a manner? So it's kind of weird that she has this like relationship with her mother, but she doesn't really know how she came about. She, talked to her mother long ago inside of the Erdtree. But she doesn't really have like a maternal relationship with Queen Marika. And
so yeah, I definitely feel like this is a bit of a weird bit of dialogue, but it might also be important to recontextualize that Melina does seem to have lost her memories, and maybe that includes memories of her mother and the kind of relationship that goes along with it. But yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. So friend Alex wants the detail as excruciating as possible. Pigsy says they don't want to waste the time on it because they've been looking at the lore for 2 years, but maybe it could help grow the channel, and you do learn things from time to time. Garrett Marshall, welcome on in. Maybe. I don't know whether or not it's quite that simple as to whether or not Elden Ring is about the trauma of childbirth and sacrificing children for power, but there is kind of a ring of truth to that. Even though like Ranni doesn't have children, she does need to make a lot of sacrifices for her godhood, essentially. But I think like the bigger takeaway for me with like the FromSoft games and having the will to enact the kind of age you want to envision would be that first you need the strength to do that, and that the kind of prerequisite for such strength can be kind of merciless and cutthroat. I think as Ranni's questline might show potentially the best in all the FromSoft games, because she does literally need to sacrifice her loved ones in pursuit of an ideal, essentially, which is kind of like in line with what the Tarnished is supposed to do, even though like you know it's kind of a stand-in and we don't actually get legitimate motivations for the Tarnished other than like, hey, do this quest. So with all that being said, I want to tie it into the point that like in order for goodness to exist in the world, you need to have the strength to suppress badness and like evil and whatnot. And there does become a very fine line where good can be construed as evil in the means of protecting it. And so that's a really slippery slope that I think even like the world in general kind of like grapples with. Like, how do you actually create a good society? And then that kind of ties into that whole paradox of tolerance, where if you don't tolerate intolerance, how can you actually be tolerant yourself? It's a little bit of a fallacy to think that way, but it's definitely one thing that countries, civilizations, and cultures need to grapple with themselves, and even individuals. All right, Vorb and Pony, thanks for the input there. Pigsy, whenever he hears amnesia, now all you hear is Donkey's voice. Yeah. C asks, burned and bodiless, is Melina burned by Mesmer's flame? That's a good question. With her being called the Kindling Maiden, most people would have assumed she may have been sacrificed for the Erdtree in some capacity. Yeah. As Vorb says, if you want peace, prepare for war. Kind of unironic, as sad as it may be. C says, if she lost her memories, Marika could have put her in prison and told her any lies she needed to pursue her goals. She may not be Marika's daughter or have ever actually been born. Potentially. With that being said, I do think it's kind of odd that of all the demigods, only Melina is the one to have really gotten Marika's vision there, allegedly, and she is the one who chooses of allegedly her own will to complete that vision, which does suggest to me there might be more between that relationship between Marika and Melina. But you bring up a good point that she could have just been brainwashed despite being bodiless, and we really don't have all the information there. Yeah, and Garrett Marshall says maybe Melina was born to burn the old tree, the first one, which is why I said like for the Erdtree and not necessarily to burn the Erdtree. So yeah, I do try to be very careful with my language, but maybe sometimes I should be a bit more explicit about stuff like that. So I appreciate the question. All right, going back to the video.
This aspect of like her identity and the circumstances of her birth are just like so bizarre. Like, was she born a preteen? How old is she? Is she 15? Is she like an infant? What's going on? I don't know what her deal is. Was she the result of an Erdtree birth that went wrong? Is she just a remembrance? Like, what is she? She doesn't have a physical body, so I was a little bit confused. But then she talks about how she's long observed the lands between. This world is in dire need of repair, and death indiscriminate. Are you prepared to commit a cardinal sin? That's before we, like, take her to the Forbidden Lands to burn her. So, she says she's going to deliver us what is ours, destined death. She has an eye that is, like, a purplish color, and a lot of people attribute this to being, like, dusk eye or gloam eye, like...
Ratatosker in shambles. So he hates it when people attribute gloam to a specific kind of color or hue. So anyway, what was I going to say? Oh yeah. So to answer Quelaag's kind of rhetorical question a moment ago about like how is Melina born? This could be like more metaphorical language in that she could have like lived a life before this, and when she was burned, that could have like kind of killed her, and she may have been reborn or born in spirit form as like the bodiless version of her that we find. So I kind of think, generally speaking, in my mind here, that Melina might be analogous to spirit ashes, or more specifically, something like Latenna. Although Latenna has a body when we first meet her, we're told in Latenna's item description that she willingly made herself become spirit ash. And so that's just kind of how Melina works the most naturally to me in my head. Hey Ding Dong, you think she's a sort of projected spirit similar to what Morgott does? Yeah, the only thing is Melina seems more bound relative to our location than Morgott. And maybe that's like a difference between Gloam and Gold, who knows? And Dastardly Duo definitely thinks Melina was brainwashed. She had no memories at the beginning of the game. Then when she gets her memories back, she starts talking about destined death constantly. And so, while it is very often assumed that Melina's mother is Marika, there might be the possibility that Melina's mother could have been the Gek, which, you know, maybe that's Marika. But yeah, I'll leave that alone for now.
When the sun kind of sets below everything and the sky turns like that dark indigo color. Also, for those of you that were wondering, there's that entity called the Dusk-Eyed Queen, and there's another entity called the Gloam-Eyed Queen. I had Loki translate them. They are the same entity. That was a localization error, so they are the same. So it's good to know. Another little, like...
Yeah, and that's been since corrected since version 1.05, I think was the last one that had Dusk-Eyed Queen in the game, but has always been consistent in Japanese as Yoigan no Jo.
Cool fun fact about Melina is that her tattoo resembles a bird's foot. It has 3 claws, and then it also has the dew claw that is right here. So there's 4 claws.
You know, I never really thought of this as the dew claw. I just kind of thought of it as like a not fully formed leg, or like where it would connect into the ankle. But I could see that, I guess. And I've also wondered whether or not it could be wing-like, more specifically, kind of more akin to the death birds, but not exactly. So,
I know a lot of people were thinking it's 3-finger inspired, but it's actually like more avian inspired, which is a little neat like wink and a nod to the death rite birds and some of the like bird-related imagery regarding death. So I kind of love that. For those of you that are wondering, why was her eye closed? What does her eye open mean? So eyes symbolically in like in Soulsborne lore have to do with like truth or cosmic knowledge or divine knowledge that's otherwise like obscured or revealed. So I think that like her eye closed indicates like a form of amnesia, but her eye open indicates a form of awakening or insight or perception. I think that that's what that is about. I know that Mesmer also has a closed eye, so I kind of wonder if there's some people that speculate there's a relationship between Melina and Mesmer. I'd be curious about that because, you know, there's this idea of kindling or burning. She acts as kindling for us, but she doesn't really have an affinity with fire outside of that. Like, she doesn't use fire attacks when we help her or when we summon her to help us fight Morgott, she uses like holy attacks. So it's kind of interesting. She doesn't have this affinity with fire outside of being burned, and any maiden can be burned. It's not exclusive to her. So I find that interesting. But also, there's like this this relationship with fire that Mesmer has, but he burns people. Like he's on the flip side of it. So like she's burning herself for sacrifice. He has an affinity with fire because he's like, there's a lot of theories, and I agree with this, that he may have like helped sealing away the giants, or that he may have been, his like era may have been associated with sealing. I don't know. This is all speculation, but it seems like maybe he was instrumental in the giant wars. We'll see. This is all like, I mean, he could have nothing to do with the giant wars, but it's just interesting that like we have this imagery with like the fire giants and flame and blood being a symbol of punishment, and then these boys.
And so for anybody just listening along, she's zooming in on the Wicker Man and pointing out the fire giant head on like the upper like thigh region, if you want to call it that, on our good boy Mitchell. So Emily was asking whether or not Melina's hair is white or silver in the Frenzied Flame ending. So I'm not going to back up the video, but it's mostly black, but there are a few like stray gray or white hairs, which is kind of also present in the character creator, where you can kind of have like the offset color for like extra strands of hair and whatnot. So Orna says, does my voice cut out sometimes for all of you, or is it just you? It happened twice now in the middle of explaining something, and you don't want to miss a word. It might be my mic. I mean, Scowleezy has said before that sometimes my mic cuts out, but it doesn't seem to be consistent. It could be an internet issue of mine. No, I haven't dropped frames yet. It could be a YouTube thing. So yeah, if you guys ever do like have legitimate audio issues, I'd rather know than try to be able to fix it, rather than you guys just kind of like suffer in silence. It's been fine for you guys? Okay, maybe it's just like a YouTube thing. And it might be because like I can only stream at 720p because my internet is Garbo. So I'm certain that doesn't help the overall experience of the quality. Pony's stream has been dropping occasionally and putting you 9 seconds behind every so often. Could be a buffering thing. Okay. Bubba had no issues? All right. Thank you all for the feedback. I appreciate that. Yeah, so it seems to be like maybe a YouTube issue, unfortunately. Just tonight, though? Okay. Thank you. Hey, Mr. Yada, I don't remember if I said hello to you earlier, but I saw your comment earlier. And then you said, any maiden can be burned, but does that mean any maiden should be burned? No wonder why Vike and Bernal are so angry. Galamoth likes to think Melina just sort of formed at the foot of the Erdtree like a crystal tier, or that she's some kind of manifestation of the Erdtree, but that's just crazy vibes-based headcanon. I don't think that's completely out of line, to be fair here, because during that Morgott fight, Melina does cast that uncastable incantation of being able to summon a manifestation of a kind of Erdtree-like thing, which is way stronger than like Blessing of the Erdtree. And we don't have access to anything like that. Also, whenever Melina dies, she manages to cast that, which I think is very provocative as well. Appreciate that. See, thank you. Vord gets an occasional stutter here and there. Understandable. All right.
You know, being like humans that were gathered together and are being burned like kindling, kind of. So it seems like almost like she was the burned and he is the burner. I don't know. But I don't know. I think that the scorched butterfly itself, the fact that it serves as kindling for a number of items, like the function that we use the butterfly in does attribute itself more to Melina than Mesmer. But I do think that the affinity with fire is more Mesmer. So I'm curious to see if they're tied together at all. This is kind of a reach, but I thought it was kind of like a cute detail. Somebody pointed out that the veins that are on this butterfly's wings kind of look like the top of the Erdtree, and it kind of could resemble like the Erdtree burning, or like, you know, the first cardinal sin, maybe associated with Mesmer potentially being the first one who burned the Erdtree or attempted to burn the Erdtree. But yeah, I'd love to see more on that in the DLC.
So I really like that idea, but then I feel like we should apply the same logic to the other butterflies. So does that mean we had a nascent, like newly hatched Erdtree, newly born Erdtree, or newly grown, I guess, if we want to be pedantic about that? And then before that, did we have a rot Erdtree, perhaps? I don't really think it fully works out, even though I really like that idea in general.
See, I think that that'll come to light soon, in June. It'll be sooner than we know. Oh, another little side note that I wanted to...
That's only like 3 weeks away, chat. About 3 weeks left.
To touch on that I thought was really cool. So Miyazaki loves to like iterate on previous NPCs, like Big Hat Logan or like Yuria the Witch from Demon Souls, and like all the different witch iterations throughout all the Dark Souls games. He loves to take like NPC ideas and kind of like reiterate them or reformat them or rework them in a way that supports his like new story a little bit better.
And people got mad that I said I was tired of that trope with Fia specifically, that she's like too many of the other kind of mostly passive women in FromSoft games. That was like my first impression of her before I completed her quest and was able to more appreciate the actual agency she has over her own fate in this game. So anyway.
Better, which I love that though. It's like a really clever way to reuse assets. So that way you're not like starting from ground one with every single thing that you do. And it allows you to make your next creation more robust and like to add more to it. Iterative work is awesome.
So Pixie says their daughter is due to be born the same week as the DLC releases, so that countdown really gets you. That is crazy, my man. Congratulations. Hope everything goes well with that. Hopefully you'll get some time to actually play and somehow fit a little bit of sleep into your life at that point. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a monumental shift from here on out. Dylan's got that countdown on hand. Thank you. And welcome to the stream.
And I don't want to downplay that. I don't want to make it seem like this is lazy, because I don't think that Elden Ring was like the product of laziness. I think it was the product of being able to like revise and iterate in a way to create this massive experience. But I do think that Melina and like this whole Dust and Death theme and Black Flame and ash and death and like the rejection of life, or like a false life cycle, does kind of like resemble Black Flame Freed's character design. The fact that she has like violet eyes, the fact that she's like rejecting flame, and that she's like representative of Black Flame. Her character design just reminds me so.
I might need to like re-listen to that because I spaced out a little bit, but yeah, I'm just gonna back up. Sorry, guys, because I don't want to like say something that is completely opposite to what Quelaag is saying here. That's what I get. Anytime I back up too much of YouTube, it does this.
Experience, but I do think that Melina and like this whole Dust and Death theme and Black Flame and ash and death and like the rejection of life, or like a false life cycle, does kind of like resemble Black Flame Freed's character design. The fact that she has like violet eyes, the fact that she's like rejecting flame, and that she's like representative of Black Flame. Her character design.
Okay, so she didn't actually go into as much detail as I thought. So I'll play it a bit more, and then I might just like wildly disagree with Quelaag and her interpretation right here.
Design just reminds me so much of Melina in a lot of ways. I think it's like the color palette and like the cloak and the violet eyes and the kind of like scarred face, or like the cloak, like, you know, I feel like there's a lot of inspiration being pulled from her, which I love to see. So
So on that whole, like, rejecting flame and like the false life explicitly, that kind of feels wrong for me in the reading of Black Flame Frida, specifically because she doesn't want flame to burn the Ashen painting, essentially, or Ashen World painting. Ashen World? No, what's it called? Anyway, she doesn't want flame to burn the painted world, and that kind of keeps it in a state of stagnation, which is kind of like that whole lock hold on life that kind of prevents death from entering the frame, literally here, to kind of allow the world to be reborn anew. So I just kind of disagree with this little characterization right here. Ponyboy's going into minor surgery on release day. Good luck with everything. I don't necessarily want to pry, but if you want to share some details, feel free. But yeah, hopefully everything goes well. Dastardly Duo says, you seriously think they missed out on the Frenzied Flame ending? You wish they kept the tree destroyed and we got to keep the Frenzied Flame head? So, yeah, I guess I haven't brought it up this stream yet, but I will kind of always voice my dissatisfaction that we can take on the Lord of Frenzied Flame kindling sequence here and spare Melina, but if we purge the Frenzied Flame from ourselves, we never see her again, which is just such a hugely missed opportunity that I am still salty to this day about it. All right.
So yeah, that is the breakdown that I have of these three kids. I'm like curious to see in the end who is who, what is what, you know, whose identity is which. I'm like, I know that this is left ambiguous to encourage the drama. Like, I know.
Plot twist, none of the butterflies correspond to any of the demigod children whatsoever. They're just butterflies.
Miyazaki's out there, because like for those of you that don't know, Miyazaki's the most fucking dramatic developer. Like, he loves to start shit. So
I know she's just kind of like spouting that off, but as soon as she said that, I just like sucked in my breath and I'm like, Kojima. maybe it's a different form of drama. I mean, I don't know, man. Kojima just hams it the hell up, which you gotta respect that. You gotta respect that about him. Like, he knows what he wants to do. It's wild. It's out there. It's kind of dumb, but it's. Oh my god, should I make this comparison? It's like the Steven Seagal films of video games, in certain ways. Hopefully that makes sense. Throne6810, welcome back to the stream, and MGHL9898. You're still so sad there's no special cutscene for sparing Melina but refusing the Frenzied Flame? Absolutely. Dastardly Duo says, you take away her own destiny, the one she decided for herself, now she's just a soul stuck in the capital forever. Feels bad, man. Kojima and the Nier guy are on the same level, yeah. Ding Dong agrees? Okay. Alright. Miyazaki loves to start shit. It'll probably take about 30 hours to get through the game. Well, I think in like the scope that Miyazaki knows where everything is and kind of knows how to play through the game, it's probably true for the devs that like play tested the absolute crap out of the game. So he at least learned from that lesson and refused to give an answer for the length of the DLC. Kojima's insane, but also a genius. Yeah. All right.
For Dark Souls 1, he had the pendant item, and he kept like hinting that like, oh, if you start with the pendant, something interesting will happen. And then it turns out that like nothing. There's nothing.
So that's not exactly true, although that is kind of what was implied by what happened. So somebody was interviewing Miyazaki, and they were just like asking, the normal gamut of questions. And so they asked Miyazaki, like, hey, whenever you start a game of Dark Souls 1 for yourself, what starting gift do you choose? Like, kind of thinking it's probably like a fluffy throwaway type question. And so Miyazaki says the pendant, which is the most useless item in the game. And so because he said the pendant, they're like, oh my god, because he chooses the pendant, that must mean there's something to do with the pendant. So I don't remember if in DS1 you can just choose to not have a starting gift, but he might have just chosen the pendant because he didn't necessarily want the handicap of having a starting item, which is like actually has value to the character. It would be kind of my cope idea for like why he would choose that one specifically. Garrett always takes 3 times as long to complete it. You did share the surgery situation? Maybe YouTube ate it? Maybe I missed it. A small cyst taken out of your cheek, so cross your fingers that you come out with a dope anime scar. Okay, yeah. That shouldn't be too bad. So yeah, hopefully that won't keep you out of commission and you'll be able to like see out of both of your eyes and enjoy the game and not be like, too anesthetized and whatnot. And catch up with all of us who get a bit of a head start on you. Hey, Potato Poker, nice to see you again. Pink is the color of the sky drained of blood, obviously. I see what you did there. All right.
Nothing. Hold on, wait. Let me see if I can find that interview. That one was like, that's my favorite fucking thing. Upon beginning a new Dark Souls game, you're offered the chance to pick a starting gift to help you on your travels. These range from very useful, like a master key that can unlock any door, to forgettable, like 10 firebombs. The most mysterious item was the pendant. In the in-game description it read, "Trinket, no effect, but fond memories can comfort travelers." Upon Dark Souls' release, game director Miyazaki said in Famitsu that he'd pick the pendant or nothing. For the last 13...
Okay, pendant or nothing. So they're kind of like equivocated there, which kind of like ties in with my headcanon.
months, fans have clamored to find out what hidden purpose it had. The Dark Souls wiki devoted 1,600 words to speculating as to its true effect. Only now has Miyazaki addressed this most mysterious of items. When it comes to the pendant, I actually had a bit of an intention to play a prank, he said. That's right, when I said it had no effect, what that meant was, no, seriously, it has no effect.
Which is why I think it's really important to pay attention to the type of language used and kind of like, reaffirms all of my Pepe Ofnir headcanons of like, oh, this is hearsay. Maybe we should treat it with a bit of skepticism, guys. But we're like, nah, hearsay is just a rhetorical device. It means what it says. And so Miyazaki saying he chooses the pendant doesn't necessarily have to imply that there's an actual significance to it, which I think is just brilliant trolling and mastery of language right there. Christopher's trying to make sure you get all your theories out in public on the Discord, which he thinks is only fair if they're about to be referenced or be brought up. Also, Miyazaki's literal. I don't necessarily know about the literal. It just really depends on the situation there. Pony won't be disappointed if the Limgrave size is accurate, but you're a betting man. So even if it's like the size or like the area of Limgrave, I'm really curious because it looks like there's a lot of vertical elements integrated into the very little that we've seen of the Shadowlands, which might add a lot of, pun intended, depth to the world that we'll be visiting there.
Given how insanely obscure Dark Souls' dense systems are, Miyazaki knew fans would go crazy figuring it out, so the whole thing was just a giant red herring to keep people guessing. Well played, Miyazaki-san. Well played. And I think that kind of sums up Miyazaki's design philosophy in a lot of ways. I do think that keeping story elements dramatic or keeping phrases a little bit vague or, some of the kanji that's being used to describe some of these things is quite archaic or flowery or a little strange, even in Japanese, I know. So the word crucible can be interpreted in English so many different ways, but in Japanese it's only interpreted one way, and there's a lot of localization efforts to try to discern the meaning behind particular NPCs and concepts.
And this is actually one of the more difficult things to keep in mind when looking at both texts of the game. So I think perhaps one of the most brilliant bits of wordplay for me was going through Bloodborne and realizing that the kanji used for orphan of Kos, Ghost no Ishi. Ishi is kind of an archaism. I guess I could pull up the Jisho. So, what's the word? Orphan. Okay, yeah. I'll look up orphan first just to show you guys a couple different things. So, Koji is kind of like the more neutral thing that you'll see today. Iji is also there as well, but it has the connotation that the parents are dead, and that's like what the first character represents more specifically here. And then, okay, this is the one that's used for the orphan of Kos, Ishi. So it's called orphan, archaic, see also Iji, essentially. So it's essentially like lost child, essentially. So the parents have been lost to this child. It's archaic. So calling him the Ishi of Gosu is relevant because, what are they called? Cold blood is called Chi no Ishi. So this is a homophone or homophone with, let's just do it this way. So Ishi equals orphan, but Ishi also equals will, volition, intent, determination. And this is kind of like a more generic form of Ishi. As far as they're used in Bloodborne, as far as like the cold blood is concerned, it's Ishi, which shows like this character is for like the representation of somebody that's dead. Ishi, so wishes of the deceased person. So like cold blood in Japanese is essentially dead blood. So within dead blood you get blood. Okay, that's what it is. Blood echoes. So yeah, cold blood is shiketsu, which means death blood, and from shiketsu you get chi no ishi. So like dying wills of blood, or hopefully that makes enough sense. And so calling the orphan of Kos Ghost no Ishi, it might meant to be a play on words to both literally mean the orphan of Kos, as well as the will or the dying wish of Mother Kos. So that, like, thinking about that in a broader perspective is just kind of like mind-blowing in terms of the kind of wordplay and things which can kind of work together in this game, and there's really no way to try to replicate that in English. Although, to be fair, this is kind of a wild coincidence that as far as the Japanese is concerned, Ishi can literally mean will as in like ambition, volition, etc., or will as in like last will and testament with like the dying wills, like those kind of ishis. And it's just the kind of the exact same thing in English. So we have like will as in like last will and testament, and will as in volition, like I was just saying a moment ago. So Jens, welcome on into the stream. It's 7 a.m. here. Nice. Unfortunately, this is kind of towards the period which I tend to wrap it up. So we've only got a little bit of the video left, but welcome in nonetheless. Glad to have you. It's midnight for Dastardly Duo. Ponyboy is saying that all they're hearing is that localizers don't get paid enough. Kind of true, to be honest. And yeah, I feel like if more time is given to like the localization process, a lot of games would be improved from that. And payment as well, because it's a pretty cutthroat industry, like translation in general, especially now with like AI knocking on the door. I don't think AI is there yet, but I mean, it still like ends up cannibalizing from the bottom up, essentially. Garrett was thinking that Shadow of the Erdtree reminds you of the shadow as in the Jungian shadow, like your shadow self. Yeah, that is a very common thought. I actually don't know about how the Jungian stuff is represented in Japanese. Maybe they'll use a different kanji for shadow there. Although maybe not. I guess I should try to look into that. Anyway, I've got like a passing familiarity with Jung, but I know there's another channel out there. I believe the Centered Tarnished really likes to take a Jungian perspective at Elden Ring in particular, if you want to dive into that more for yourself. All right. So, are you all deaf now? Like, right now? What can I say to make sure that this is working? Much silence. So I can't tell if you all. I can't tell if you guys were delayed from the OBS or if it's actually current. So could you guys not hear Quelaag, or was I muted before? Because it could have been me being a goober. You couldn't hear the video? Or is it me specifically? The video is silent, but I'm audible? That's weird because I can hear the video. Well, not right now because it's paused. Oh, that's so strange. Because, I mean, the way that I have my OBS routed is that you guys should literally... Oh, I see what I did. Alright guys, here's a little bit of streamception for you. I must have somehow slid this down when I moved my mouse away. So you guys were not hearing any of my desktop audio after all. Whoopsies. Uh-oh. Alright, where did you start off? I was like, oh no, did I talk for all that time and I was muted? It certainly would have been the first time on my channel. Alright, thanks for letting me know. Alright, hopefully this is good here.
Mysterious item was the pendant. In the in-game description it read, "Trinket, no effect, but fond memories can comfort travelers." Upon Dark Souls' release, game director Miyazaki said in Famitsu that he'd pick the pendant or nothing. For the last 13 months, fans have clamored to find out what hidden purpose it had. The Dark Souls wiki devoted 1,600 words to speculating as to its true effect. Only now has Miyazaki addressed this most mysterious of items. When it comes to the pendant, I actually had a bit of an intention to play a prank, he said. That's right, when I said it had no effect, what that meant was, no seriously, it has no effect. Given how insanely obscure Dark Souls' dense systems are, Miyazaki knew fans would go crazy figuring it out. So
I did go back way too far, so let me do this.
Some of the kanji that's being used to describe some of these things is quite archaic or flowery or a little strange, even in Japanese, I know. So, the word crucible can be interpreted in English so many different ways, but in Japanese it's only interpreted one way, and there's a lot of localization efforts to try to discern the meaning behind particular NPCs and concepts and items. And so it's really interesting that we see, how community driven these games are, because since its inception, Demon's Souls was so esoteric and none of the menus made any sense. So it really allowed the community to come together and try to decipher everything. And I love that about the lore. That's why I love the lore, is because it's community driven too. And I think writing these vague characters, or writing scenarios in which one character can be another character, or that there's a spirit self and a physical self, I think that it lends itself to the drama, and I love that. And that's why I want to encourage y'all to check out Tim Diggity's video on Is Melina Miquella, because I think it's compelling. Even though I'm not fully sold on it, I think it's compelling, and I think that y'all should absorb all the weird-ass theories while we still can, because this is the most beautiful time for Soulsborne lore. It's everybody can be correct and wrong, and we're all just having a good time throwing spaghetti at the wall trying to figure out what the fuck is going on.
Yeah, that's kind of an interesting point, because definitely there's going to be some changes of opinion come the 22nd, essentially, or even the 21st, depending on how big these revelations are going to be. So I guess it will be interesting to see how the community develops in the wake of the release of the DLC, as opposed to like all the hype and kind of goodwill that's kind of being shared in the lead up to it. So yeah, I don't know. This is probably like the first time that my channel has like been around for an active release where I've been like really interested in actively covering the lore while the game is still alive. So there's probably going to be some interesting changes to follow that. Because like for those who were following the Dark Souls lore train like way in the beginning, like the community was a lot rougher around the edges, and the edges were much larger, I guess, in comparison. So over time, the community has mellowed out into what it is today, and I think that's kind of overall been a good thing, probably because the fan base has aged, but maybe some more of that toxicity will come back when everybody else like plays the DLC again, but we'll see. Hopefully it won't be that bad, and now that I think like the lore community is being a lot more collaborative in general, it'll probably be a better space overall, perhaps. All right.
So, yes, thank you. This video was like super fucking long, but I hope that y'all have fun. And I'm going to be creating, like, I'm going to be doing a ton of content. Obviously, I'm going to be streaming my playthrough of the DLC, completely, like, first time, no knowledge. We're going to be, like, hitting every single wall. We're going to be looking for all the mysteries. It's going to be fantastic. So make sure to tune in for that. I'll be sure to play alongside you guys. And then I'm also gonna do like a couple of just fun videos, kind of like a, you know, like maybe like a breakdown of things that I'm most looking forward to for the DLC. Like I want to talk about the Eokite, I want to talk about the Briars and the Bloodstar, I want to talk about all that stuff. So yeah, I think that we're gonna be in for a treat with the DLC, and I'm quite excited. So yeah, thank you so much. Bye. Bye, 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 bye.
All right. So, I liked that video by Quelaag. So one of the things that I do really enjoy about Quelaag as a content creator in general is that even though she does say like, oh, this is speculation, I kind of feel like in many cases she doesn't necessarily even need to go that far, because she is very consistent with her word choices in using things like maybe, perhaps, like this is what I think, etc., which makes it really easy to follow along like what's textual versus what is opinion, which I wish more content creators were a little bit more mindful about. So yeah, nonetheless, I think that Quelaag is a very strong lore theorizer, and I appreciate the approach that she brings to the lore, and is a welcome member of the community. And she's like an OG. She's been covering this stuff like pretty much longer than almost anybody at this point. So for those who might not be too familiar with Quelaag's channel, she did get hacked earlier in the week, and she kind of hemorrhaged some subscribers during that ordeal. So if you enjoyed the video, I highly recommend giving her video a like and a sub to like help kind of offset the damage done by the algorithm to the channel. It would be quite a nice thing to do. But again, nobody's obligated to do that, but you know, it sucks to have something like that happen, especially with how volatile YouTube is to begin with. So yeah, that'll be it for me for tonight. I will be going live again at the same time tomorrow, or today technically, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, as far as the weekend goes, I'm going to be real with you guys. I have not been keeping up with Destiny 2 as much as I should have been, and I'm at the point where FOMO is going to bite me in the ass if I don't complete the things that I need to complete before the 4th. So I might not stream this weekend to try to catch up with the stuff that I'm going to permanently miss out on. It sucks. They got me by the balls. So stay posted. I might stream. So it'll just be like a thing. So with that being said, I'm definitely going to stream today, the 30th, again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but I might not stream Friday, the next day, or Saturday and Sunday. But Monday by the latest, I should probably be able to stream again, and hopefully you guys understand. V-Limit says, you think she bounced back to have way more subs than she initially lost? I can appreciate that. Sweet. Tad Wrong, nice to see you. Somehow you never watched Quelaag stuff back in the day. I mean, she kind of popped off more with Elden Ring because her channel was a lot smaller a year or two ago. Yeah, and as Otoako says, you do feel bad on the day of release of the DLC for whoever rushes to a theory, as you're sure will have missed details along the way that'll take time to find. Maybe. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff which you can build off already, so hopefully that doesn't happen, or if it does, like, it doesn't like stick around or kind of set too high expectations of like what people expect and kind of mislead people as far as their interpretations go later on there. But that's a really good point. All right, so once again, everybody, thank you so much for joining. That'll be it for tonight's stream. As always, live. Well, it's not as always. Anyway, live again tomorrow, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hopefully we'll catch you then. Till then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.